Colleagues, welcome to the 11th meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. For those watching, clearly a virtual meeting during our COVID-19 emergency. And while City Hall is currently closed, we ask and invite folks to view the meeting via live streaming YouTube or the city's website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact sppc@london.ca. So colleagues, I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner. Could you turn your audio on, Councillor Turner, please?
Sorry, I went the other way. My apologies. I had it muted and then unmuted. Anyway, with respect to the additional motions that have been forwarded by my colleagues, the second motion with respect to directions to a number of boards, including the board of the Middlesex London Health Unit, I'll declare a conflict there as I'm an employee at that board.
So noted. Thank you very much. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, with respect to item 4.1, which is appointments to the London Public Library Board, one of the candidates is a member of the board of directors of my employer, Western University, so I'll be declaring on that one.
Thank you very much. Any other declarations? Thank you. Seeing none, I have nothing on the consent agenda. So colleagues, it is being 4:05 and these meetings to begin not before that time. I would like to invite Stephen Justizia and Craig Cooper to make presentations with respect to the Housing Development Corporation and the 2019 annual meeting, complete with shareholder resolutions. So if I could turn it over, please, to Stephen and Craig. Mr. Cooper? You are on mute. Now you are not.
Thank you, Your Worship.
If others are not muted, could you please? And otherwise we get Mr. Cooper in stereo. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Go ahead.
There we go. Sorry, Your Worship. I believe Kevin Dickens was going to say a few opening words first, if possible, before we run into our presentation.
Okay, as he does, I'll remind all three presentations that it's a maximum 10-minute presentation. And as Mr. Sharma learned once before, I'm not shy to cut people off, and then of course it's open to questions and responses from colleagues. So go ahead, Mr. Dickens, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So before turning the floor over to Mr. Cooper and Mr. Justizia, I'd like to note that in addition to the 2019 reports to the shareholder from the Housing Development Corporation, you're also receiving the audit reports and related recommendations of civic administration. You will find that the audit reflects financials in good standing and that the civic administration report recommends the extension of Mr. Cooper's position as board and the associated bylaw adjustments related to the single person interim board. So the city continues to work closely, probably more so than ever, and together with HDC on our housing needs and really approaching our desire to make an impact in the housing and homelessness situation from a systems perspective. With that being said, I would now like to turn it over to Mr. Cooper as the board chair. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Cooper. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm very pleased to be here today in my interim role as board chair for HDC. Mr. Justizia is going to provide a brief overview presentation of our 2019 annual report. So if members could open that provided presentation, and we'll be on slide 3 initially. Just going to give you a bit of an overview. As we know, HDC is a centralized body with specific tools that are looking to create more affordable housing in our community. We know that path is complex. It's a difficult one to navigate and one that needs a lot more effort and a lot more traffic in our community. As we all know, we're in significant need of affordable housing in London. And as we can see, we're feeling it more than ever, even with the COVID pandemic. So our presentation is going to highlight the report for you, as well as information to help improve the work and really the reporting on the entire housing system. So all of our activities we're going to be discussing today are aligned with the county's or the council's multi-year strategy and budget, our Housing Stability for All action plan, as well as our other community plans. It really involves a lot of work done in partnership with the city as a whole and our whole network of community partners. I'm going to turn it over to Steve here, barring any technical difficulties, to provide some overview on the presentation, and we'll be moving on to slide 4 of the presentation.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
Thanks,
Justizia.
Doug. I'm unmuted, Your Worship, and others. Can you hear me okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm on the slide that's partnerships and development. And thanks again, and thank you, Your Worship. HDC's work, as we've talked in the past, is generally done behind the scenes when organizations, builders, developers, investors, neighbors, funders, incredible groups and people in our city can align on the plans and the local needs, the required resources, and the supports needed to move developments from ideas into homes. Our work helps bring these elements together. The result of our work is not just the 100 more housing units that started or the 123 that were recently occupied and rented. It's the value that each unit brings in helping people achieve housing stability, the value of leveraging and stacking investments to create community infrastructure. This is absolutely important municipal infrastructure. And the work that's done to create value for communities that will serve us for generations to come. And our challenge remains sustaining this value as costs and needs, as Craig has spoken to, continue to go up. So to the next slide on negotiating bonusing. To address this, we've continued to expand places where we look for solutions. And when council agreed to have us negotiate height and density bonusing from developers in exchange for affordable housing units, it's a great example of that. We were advancing this work we are continuing to advance this work, and most recently, together with developers, have aligned future bonused units with groups who have prioritized housing needs, including those who require supplements and supports to staying housed. This is not done anywhere else. To put a price tag on those 53 units that we negotiated with you in 2019, and let's say that those units were valued at a minimum of $50,000 per door. And those units have brought costs of over $2.5 million that it would have been to create. Well, you've acquired that value at no cost. So our challenge is to keep finding these new ways of accessing units, and to provide developments as the province, in this case, the provincial bonusing regulations are scheduled to end next year. So on the next slide, we talk about land and development. And there are other challenges. And I think the greatest challenge moving forward is likely going to be the challenge related to land. There are no advantages provided to affordable housing development in accessing lands within our very competitive local housing market. So if we want a viable pipeline of affordable housing projects, well, then we need a pipeline of available lands as the entry point for this work. And the entry point was the work that we've done with council in the past related to the policies and the resulting transfers of lands to HDC at the end of 2018, so in 2019. And in the very short time since receiving those lands, HDC has now advanced those lands to detailed site plans and zoning applications. And we're looking at other ways that we can continue to expedite that work. We're also advancing on the acquisition of former school sites based on the policies that you helped to create, and that we continue to support the work that's being done in public housing regeneration. So the future sustainability of affordable housing will likely rely heavily on the collective work that we do to make lands available for that kind of development. So with all of these activities, they're only as good as the investments needed to bring plans to life. And all of these activities have to happen together. So HDC has been able to support local organizations navigate and stack programs and other investments to help secure and advance these affordable housing projects. To do this at no cost to the organizations. In this way, what HDC also does is we're able to monetize our in-house time as part of our municipal contribution to these projects. This helps applications for other government funding and investments, which is why we've done such a good job as a community in attracting over $33 million of funding applications made to CMHC alone, and many of those already in pay. So the next slide is a bit of a busy slide. And what it intends to reflect, and I'm sorry, yes, it's slide 8, but hopefully it's the one that you clearly recognize as being the busy slide. Thanks, Craig. So we've got many new policies, programs, funding that is driving more development activity. And if you looked at each of those separate lines, each separate development activity, each project requires different timelines, different resources to get from inception to completion. And there are many factors that impact the timeline of each of these initiatives, whether it's the projects, whether it's the land work. Our challenge remains, how do we continue to work together on those factors where we have control to shorten the development cycles and create more units of affordable housing at the greatest possible value, and with the commitments and the contributions the council has. Greg?
Go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
So as we've outlined, there's
Thank you, and there's two minutes left as well.
A lot of work done. Obviously, we need more assistance to help expedite our housing development. As I can attest to, our work continues with the city and others. HDC is going to continue to update council on this work that we're working with others in the community and others at the city through the various reports, including our shared quarterly housing report. Moving to slide 9, I do want to close by acknowledging those who have supported these accomplishments in 2019, including the staff of HDC. Although I've been with HDC for only a few weeks to a month, I've had the pleasure of working with them and can only attest to the challenging nature of the work that we all do and their commitment to doing that work. So we're available to respond to any of your questions, and I want to take the time to thank you, Your Worship and Council.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank you as well for respecting the 10 minutes, but also giving us, more importantly, good detail. I'll open it up for any comments or questions. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to all for the presentation. This is, I think, the 5th one or so that I've had the pleasure of being able to see. And so every year I try to come up with a new question, but through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Gastizia. As you were speaking there and talked about in that slide about land and development, something tweaked a little bit, because in economic development, we have the industrial land development strategy, where we identify lands, procure them, and reserve them for willing suitors that might be willing to develop industrial lands on the edge of the city in those industrial parks. We don't have a similar strategy so much in affordable housing. Would there be much merit to something like that? Having in your presentation identified some of the challenges with being able to retain and identify lands for those, there may be willing developers that would look for sites if the city was able to retain those and have a ready inventory.
Through Your Worship, the industrial land strategy has actually been a model for much of what we have been working on. So although we don't necessarily call it a single strategy, as I think you've heard through the work that we've been doing in partnership with planning, as well as with other areas of the city, realty services, the concept is exactly the kind of concept that we need, which is one that says, how do we keep available lands always active and available for development? And of course, the difference is that in industrial lands, you're usually working on the outskirts of the city, where a lot of our lands and interests related to development are generally more infill to the city. So the strategy changes a little bit. The strategy changes, but it also has different opportunities. And that's been a lot of the work that we have been doing collectively. So when you created the school policy, that was instrumental in allowing us to advance in a different way. that doesn't preclude the ability to do other things. And we're continuing to look at those, especially now with the level of need that we are all seeing. But I just want to point out that the industrial land strategy is a great model that has actually influenced a lot of what the work is that we've been doing.
Thank you. Councillor Turner?
Yeah, through your worship, thank you. That's helpful. As we go forward, I think it'd be helpful for us to know too if there are opportunities or policy changes that we need to consider to help anticipate what land banking might look like. You mentioned the surplus school sites. If I recall from one of the planning presentations when we were approving that policy, the fact that we have a housing development corporation puts us in line higher for being able to work to acquire those than if we didn't have a housing development corporation. So this gives us an advantage over other possible purchasers of that land versus us just being a purchaser as the city on its own. Is that correct?
Through your worship, yes, it does, as does the service management function that the city has. And, you know, when we talk about the different tools, one of the tools is governance, which I think is what you're talking about. And as you'll recall from past presentations and within our document, there's reference to the idea of a land trust. And a land trust has different abilities to how it both acquires land and also how it holds land, similar again to the industrial land strategy.
Right. Through your worship, thank you.
Good.
I think that's great, and it's nice to see on one page the impacts of the bonusing provisions, and it's showing that a small policy change has actually had a rather profound impact and had some significant cost savings as well. So well done, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Squire?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As a councillor, I think the most important thing, or one of the biggest challenges I've faced over the period of time that the HDC has been in existence is explaining in a really fulsome and yet simple way, what does the HDC do? And why is it important to the City of London? That may seem clear to us, but on a lot of occasions, it's not necessarily crystal clear to the public. And I think my background, obviously, in Habitat for Humanity lends towards the issues of land and development of land. But it's really important to me that based on where we came out of the budget, that people understand we're getting results from the entity that's been created. So I just want to focus on one of the things that became very key during the budget process, and that was the work of HDC with London Middlesex Community Housing. And I think there's a real difficulty in the public in understanding even the difference between the two entities. So although it's touched on in your report about regeneration, I wonder if you could expand a little for me what is happening right now between the HDC and London Middlesex Community Housing in the area of regeneration, because we allocated money in the budget for that. And this is a conversation I've been hearing about, and other councillors who are here have been listening to for 6 years, about something is coming, something is happening. We're working on it. I wonder if you could provide me with sort of an up-to-date presentation. What is happening? And if we're in the early stages, what can we expect to see happening in the area of London Middlesex Community Housing regeneration?
Mr. Justizi.
Thank you. Through your worship. I know that London Middlesex Community Housing is going to be making presentation directly after this. And I can stay back because I'm always conscious of the fact that they are really the owners and the managers of their sites. But what I can speak to is I can speak to the function that HDC provides to LMCH. So if there's, I think some of your question may actually be better responded to through some of their presentation as well. But if I could, those two questions there, I think one is the difference between the two entities. And the difference between the two entities is the difference between the slide where I spoke to the very difficult function of not just getting land, understanding and navigating the programs, being able to advance those lands through the planning and the permissions in the same way as private developers do through the city, so almost like a third party. And then being able to bring those together to fruition is all the development activities versus, I think, when you look at the housing corporation within the public housing continuum, they are masterful, I think, at the work that they have to do with 3,300 units of social housing within a very, very different rule system. And actually what we've been doing and working on with them is very similar to the work that we've done with the schools and with the not-for-profits and even with the developers that are coming in with bonusing, where what we're doing is our work is really more about understanding how do we maximize the value of the land. What's the zoning changes? What are the municipal tools that are going to be needed to shift from their existing structure to a different structure down the road? That's where our expertise is, which is a different set of tools, if you will.
Councillor?
Thank you very much. I will wait then for London Middlesex Community Housing, since you're a little hesitant to get into it, which I understand. I really do understand, I think, better from this report, what is going on with the HDC and the different elements of it, and I appreciate that. The only thing I would continue to like to see is that, because this is largely a document that we relate to the public through, that the language be less, about what you use in the industry and internal to the industry, and more that people will start to understand. So when I see things like, under accomplishments, advanced new approaches to accessing and stacking government investments and aligning program requirements with project needs and budgets, that's the kind of language, quite frankly, that takes me a long time to unpack. And I'm not even sure right now I understand what you mean. I think you mean a better way to get money from the government and get it to the people who need it. But I really would encourage you to really work on plain English. And if you take that as a criticism, I'm sorry, but it just sticks out at me that we need people to understand what we're doing. But thank you very much for the report.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Justizia and Mr. Cooper, for your presentation. I've listened to a number of these presentations, and it's really good to see the projects and the status of what you've been working on for the past number of years, and it's very gratifying to see the work that you've done. So thank you for that. I do have a question regarding your comment about working together. Mr. G, you mentioned about the need to continue working together, and there are a number of factors there. And one of the factors I've heard is that the red tape that we can do a better job at with stakeholders. And I'd like you to just explain, or have we come through, are we in a better place today than when we started through the process and working with stakeholders and trying to see these projects continue smoothly and faster if possible? Just if you can add a little bit more to the challenges that you are facing. Thank you.
Mr. Justizia?
Certainly, through the mayor. Let me answer that last one first. We are absolutely doing completely different work than we were doing years ago. Not only in the way that we are able to work with the people who are in the community. We're sort of working behind the scenes with people in the community. The earlier we're involved, the easier it is to navigate some of those systems that you're talking about. I think the other question that you ask is about the complexity of the system. And I'm always a little bit cautious around that because, as I said in the presentation, there are many factors that are involved in every single development, and they're always different. What we're looking for are what are the factors that we can change. And the reason why I say that is because many of those factors are there for very good reasons. You're looking at over $100 million worth of projects that have been added as infrastructure to our community in the course of the last 4 years. When you're doing that, there are inherent risks. You're helping to construct infrastructure that's going to be here likely in 200 years. So there are naturally some challenging pieces that we go through in this process that you actually want to remain challenging pieces. And I don't say that too often, but I think it's intentional. It's where we can make the changes to keep the timelines tighter and to know where we can advance affordable housing differently as municipal infrastructure. So I think those have been where council has been focused. I think there's still more work to be done. And I say that work is collective because if we go right back to our original business case, part of the reason why we are what we are is to help push and turn those dials as much as we possibly can from external to the city, but at the same time be working very closely with the city. So I think those were your questions around the tools, as we call them.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I appreciate your answer, Mr. Justicia. So getting back to the factors, the challenges, where are, and the complexities, and so do we really know where we are today or where we need to be tomorrow? Is it just a matter of dealing with the challenges, the factors that arise, and being prepared to deal with those challenges?
Mr. Caesar.
Through your worship, it's a complex question. Our needs are continuously changing. Here's what we know. And you know, if we look at where we are right now in the middle of a pandemic, it's only pointed a spotlight of what I think we all knew was already there, which was, as the mayor said in our housing strategy report, we're in a crisis. What does that mean? It means that it's not linear. It's not just about the housing market and the lack of vacancy. So we try to focus on what we do know. We know that we have a community that has a real lack of vacancy, especially in the rental market and especially in the lower end of the rental market. So even with what we are experiencing right now, even if there was shifts in the marketplace, the reality is you don't get rid of a 0% vacancy rate very quickly. The second thing that I think all have learned, especially through the work that Mr. Cooper has been doing, is that the vulnerable are vulnerable. If people aren't stably housed, then they are at risk of many other things, whether it's attachment to the labor force or whether it's health-related issues. So we know that as a community, we're in this unique place of having a really solid and vibrant housing market, and at the same time also having a very high, what they call core housing need, number of people who are living with too much of their income going to their housing. So we know what factors are with us. We also know that we're not going to just be able to, we know that we need at least 5,000 units right now. But the issue isn't to just dump 5,000 units into the market. The issue is to be looking everywhere. And I think part of the work that you're seeing, both from what I will say has been incredibly impressive over the course of the last couple of years, is the work that we're doing in partnership with civic administration, where we're really looking to say, we can't leave any stones unturned when it deals with any of the authorities or permissions or programs that we have that can help us advance affordable housing. So I think to your question, I think that's the strategy, is that there's a lot of unknowns, but if we hone in on what do we know, the other thing that we know is that when we invest in housing as infrastructure, it's one of the few infrastructures that, as council will see, for the 7 million in over the last few years, 100 million in total value, what you're seeing is you're seeing value in your investment, but that also appreciates. So to me, those are the knowns that we have, and that's sort of where I try to focus my attention.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins, are we good?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the answers.
I have Councillor Pelosa and then Councillor Van Holst. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff. Thank you for the report. Couple questions. Reading the report, it mentions numerous 1 and 2 bedroom units that you're building. Wondering if there's any 3 or more. And the second part of the question is, as you were mentioning, there's many unknowns right now in many ways, and the pandemic. Seeing that you have 2 projects completed or set for completion in 2020 and 2 set for construction to start in 2020, just looking for a general update if what kind of delays that we've encountered so far with those, recognizing the construction industry is also potentially behind due to the restrictions.
Mr. Justicia.
Through your worship, those last questions first. We've been very, very fortunate on the projects that were able to be advanced. And I think in credit to the work that we've been talking about, the affordable housing projects that required their permits were able to make application for their permits. And if you're out of the corner of Dundas and Clark, you're going to see a lot of work already going on the Zarin project, which is fabulous to see. YOU will be shortly. And then you know that we're working as well with Indwell. Theirs actually is for the next round, but we're still working with them. And the two projects that we were active on already at 1090 and 1090 Hamilton Road and 1045 Dundas Street, we're actually able to progress all the way through because they were projects already underway. So they, within the emergency plans, were able to continue their work, and actually we're continuing right on schedule. And in fact, what we've done is we've met with some of those organizations about maybe some of the shifts in the needs that are happening right now. So we've got good activity on the housing front. And I just want to go to your first question. If I can bother you to just reiterate, I want to make sure I'm capturing it correctly.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just a lot of the things we're saying about 1 and 2 bedroom units that were being completed, wondering what we're doing for market rent for 3 bedroom units.
Mr. Caesar.
So our new projects that you're going to see, you'll start seeing 3 bedroom units, but as it relates to the vacancy market in London, our greatest need continues to be the 1 bedroom units at or below average market. And it is, it used to be more noticeably that was our greatest need. We know that there's other needs in other markets, but it's still the 1s and 2s and the bachelors that dominate the local need.
Councillor?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Hillier.
Thank you very much. So we talked about leaving no stones unturned. I know that you work with a number of rostered individuals. I brought a few to the HDC who weren't rostered, and also a number of projects that didn't get done. I see those; they were a good idea. That didn't happen, but smaller ones. So we're working in larger, impressive projects. I want to see what are we going to be doing in the future to fill those small holes with infill. How can we help those things happen? Because they do, those bedrooms happen one at a time.
Mr. Caesar.
Through your worship, I totally agree, for starters, that we need to be looking in all directions. Most recently, council approved a community improvement plan related that has a component in it directly related to secondary dwelling units. Having had a prior experience with conversions of single units, what I can share with you is that the administrative time and the costs don't scale directly to the smaller units. So knowing that we have a limited amount of resources available to us, to the degree that I would love to see a whole range of tools available to get different buildings of different sizes, the reality is that we've been moving on our large projects because that has been where we have been able to leverage the most number of units at the deepest affordability for the longest period of time. And right now, that's really tended to be our focus. Although I wish there was other programs and efforts that we could be doing.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I'll tell you that I did have other hopes for the HDC, and that was for their ability to assist with urban regeneration, which happens, building by building, and some of those aren't as big as the ones you're working on. I would like to know, one of the accomplishments you listed was an assessment, a site assessment. There's one at, say, 403 Thompson Road. What's involved in a site assessment that makes that an accomplishment?
Mr. Caesar.
Through your worship.
Go ahead.
Not all lands are easily converted into developments. And I think there's a notion sometimes that when you see a property, you can envision what it might look like, but there may be attributes related to that property, whether it's heritage, whether it's a butternut trees. I've had the misfortune of running into beautiful trees, by the way. Whether it's the environmental assessment, whether it's the waterways under the ground or the pipes that are under the ground. Those assessments are very complex assessments before you even get into the planning permissions that are required to determine what's the maximum that a property can hold. And when you look at a development cycle, as you've often seen through your planning and environment committee meetings, development on a land probably precedes the first document that arrives at the city, sometimes by years. And that's the work that's done ahead of time to determine whether or not the land has value, what its value can, how you exercise that value, and then what permissions would be required to do that.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you. Yes. Now I know the neighbor at the King Edward Plaza has expressed interest in having housing there. There's a very big property that could be directly adjacent. Are we reaching out to neighbors in this case, or perhaps in other cases, for assistance with that?
Mr. Cizia.
Through your worship, I know that I never like giving this as an answer, but I can't talk about specific properties, but I think it's fair to say that whenever we're advancing the function of fit and the neighborhood, and neighbors is a part of, first of all, it's part of the planning process, but it's also part of knowing that everything that we do needs to be able to fit into a neighborhood. So even if we're not approaching the neighbors directly on the use of the land, and by the way, many do approach us because land is so valuable, we're always looking at how do we maximize and then get projects that fit within a community setting.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you. Now, you said you've negotiated contracts on two schools. Can you tell us what those are?
Mr. Cizia. Through your worship, they're not closed yet, so we didn't get into a lot of detail because we were conscious of that until they're fully completed. But you'll see within both the report and in the auditor statement, there's contributions and commitments being made to Elm Street and Duluth, two sites that were surplus a number of years ago, haven't been used for schools in some time. And then, of course, through the policies that council created, allowed us the ability to advance on those.
Okay, well, that's exciting and encouraging. Thank you very much. Those are my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Hillier, then Councillor Lehman. Go ahead, Councillor Hillier.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, what I'm thinking is with workplaces changing, we have so many people be working from home. We're going to start seeing the use of properties changing. We're going to see a lot more vacant spaces for offices, like office space, office buildings, and we might have landlords that are willing to change. How hard would it be for us to change the zoning and switch this over? We might see an opportunity in this.
I'm not sure the zoning is for Mr. Justicia, but did you want to make a broad comment if you'd like, briefly?
I think through the worship, you answered the question correctly. I think the best I can say is that we are focusing on what we know, and we're always trying to keep a lens. I'm in constant contact with our friends in CMHC and other places that do data market analysis to know where those shifts are, and I know that the city is as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Lehman and Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Gustizia, for your presentation today. In accomplishments in 2019, I see that 53 new affordable renting housing units have been brought to bear through the use of bonusing. I'd like you to speak to, our strategy of using bonusing to obtain new affordable rental housing. Are you pleased with the amount of units being brought to bear through this strategy, or would you like to see changes to that, or are you comfortable that this is an effective way for the city to bonus?
Mr. Cizia.
Through your worship, if there was one thing that I could wish about bonusing it, it's that the rules of Bill 108 would have shifted, because this is a provision within Section 37 of the Planning Act that is soon to leave your toolbox. And in fact, it's hard for me to take credit for this work, because I think it's part of a team. What we do is we've been acting as an intermediary. And I think that because we've been able to actually monetize, like we can sit down with each development and say, what's the pro forma of that development looking like? What's the need in that community looking like? And because we can get into those business details and also know that we don't want to do anything that would impact the development from being a successful development, that you end up with a win-win-win. So to me, the greatest opportunity was to first be able to enter into being able to doing bonusing for affordable housing. The second one was then the continual turning of those dials, and to know that most recently we've been working, and I'm saying with the developers, and I mean that because they have been coming to the table, seeing this as a tool that they would like to use. We've had great uptick from them in their interest in this approach, including the ability to leverage existing units and to start applying bonusing. Because remember, these buildings and units may not come in for a little while. You're putting it on the land. But what we've been starting to do is work on the ability to acquire some of those units within existing buildings without offsetting the function of a bonus, and being able to attach them to populations in need. So to me, I think the collective work has displayed incredible value.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lehman. I have Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thanks to Mr. Justizia and Mr. Cooper for the report and for the presentation. It's a very good report, a lot of information in here, and it's, I know we seemed impatient to Mr. Justizia, I'm sure to you, Council seemed impatient over the years. So I'm really pleased to see this the success that you're starting to have. And you did tell us, just wait, it'll start. So thank you, and apologies for seeming impatient. I have a question. A few questions. They're kind of all over the place. The land transfers and the surplus schools and things like that. What is the process in turning that from surplus land into actually an affordable housing development? If we own the land, are you going through an RFP process the way we did at the Sherwood Forest School, or is it different for every development?
Mr. Justizia.
Well, Your Worship, there's two answers. One is the 10-second answer, and the other one is the the
10 seconds works, actually. Go ahead.
I'll go with the first one. Each property every property is different. Every property, the expression of value on every property is different. How we can leverage and work with the city on shifting the tools that are needed. And that's really a critical piece, is if we're going to make shifts in this work, we have to keep pushing that. When I look at the schools, these are buildings that were purchased with public funds that we have to pay full money for at market value, but at least we're retaining them within the public realm for public use. Then all of those permissions and all of the approach is the same as it normally is. So the reality to that is that every project takes a long period of time, and how you activate it could be different in every single one. Our strategy is, how do we keep compressing what we can compress to get the greatest value out? We don't want to scrimp on design or on quality, but it's how do we compress those timelines?
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. So my second question is, it goes back to page 35 on the agenda. It's the agenda page numbering, and it's the total HDC development activity. Just specifically, I'm just looking for clarification on the Youth Opportunities Unlimited development. It says that there is 0 market units, but on the previous page, it had said that it would be a mix of affordable and market rent. Is there a typo there, or I wonder if you could give me some clarity on that.
Through Your Worship, I believe that the figure there reflects There is an adjacent development that YOU has within that block that does have market units in it. And then there's the portion that will have a mix of units that will be affordable. So it's really reflecting their whole portfolio.
Councillor Cassidy.
Great. Thank you. So I'm wondering about the mixed developments, which are great to see, and I know that's what we were hoping to see throughout the city. But I wonder, when we talk about market rent, is it actual market rent, what the market will bear, or is it the average market rent? So is it also regulated, or are the market units like wide open, whatever the market will bear?
Mr. Castizia.
Through your worship, it really is different in different projects. Generally, when we're talking about market units, we're talking about units that we are not funding. But that doesn't mean that those units don't self-fund or contribute to other units within the development, so that there's offsets within the project. When you're talking about with the not-for-profit sector, you're generally not getting too high up into the unit costs because the revenues are going back in. It's all part of one. Each development, again, is a little bit different in what the market will bear. And one of the things that we see is that there's a lot of loans. There's a lot of loan programs. There's community-based loan programs. There's loan programs that are part of the federal funding. The loan programs require repayment, even if they're at very low interest. The repayments are what factors into the rents. So the factoring of the rents is really a factoring of how much you can get in grant. And what we're really seeing is we're seeing a move away from grants. So part of what you're seeing is that as we're doing new developments, even within the mixes, our function of working more closely with the city allows us to then stack in supplements or stack in other programs or different populations. So if you're looking at, it's very hard to give averages on this because you could be looking at a building that our municipal contribution seems like it was very minor as a dollar contribution, but that doesn't mean that our function in how we leveraged our money wasn't there. And I know to Councillor Squire's earlier comment, you say a word like leverage and it's vacant sometimes. So let me explain. We may have to put in a significant amount of our HDC funding to hold a project while we go and work with the other funders to be able to structure the rest of the pro forma. So we know that that building can work. We know that it's going to function, but we don't have the financing yet. What we can do is take the risk of putting our municipal money in there as a whole until we get the rest of the money. If we can pull our money out, it may look like we've put less money in. It doesn't mean it wasn't critically important to have that money in there. So there's different ways that we use our funding that result in different rents.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you. And I love that you can monetize, as you put it, monetize the time that you've put in, the staff time spent on these projects. I think that's really important, and that's something new that I learned today. So thank you for that. Finally, going back to Councillor Turner's, some of the things that he talked about, industrial land development, I'm wondering specifically about downtown. We have the core area action plan, and we're looking to revitalize downtown. Our HDC staff, is there a thought perhaps of working directly with the people involved in the action plan for downtown and perhaps targeting specific, perhaps vacant buildings downtown, or seeing where there could be possibilities for developing affordable housing downtown? With Fanshawe down there, students especially would be looking for this kind of affordable housing, and then people working in the retail and the restaurant industries downtown are the kinds of people the kinds of jobs where people would benefit from more affordable housing.
Mr. D'Souza.
Through your worship, I'm just going to add one quick note and turn it over to Mr. Cooper, who's had great involvement on the core area action plan, and we've been working very closely. But my starting point would be to say that the downtown was actually the downtown and the Old East Village were our first areas of target when we were creating these original programs back 20 years ago. And in fact, there are in excess of 500 units of affordable housing in the core area. And as things keep shifting, it will always be an important zone of activity, but we also want to make sure that we're doing it everywhere. But if I could, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Cooper to speak to the core action plan.
Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you. All right. So yes, I can let you know that a little bit of answer here is that so the core action plan does identify the need for affordable housing, the need for housing in the core. It is something that we are always open to having conversations with developers, and the unique position I have as the dual role with the homeless prevention manager and seeing the vulnerable population in the core in need of housing, working with the HDC and meeting with some of the developers and landowners downtown. I can actually see those linkages, and I can start to work on those linkages to bring those projects to fruition where there is interest. And so having a planning background and some of those understanding of the process to try and help shorten that timeline of whether it's a development service review or the planning where we can, or it's not legislated. We're working through all those aspects to increase that work downtown.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy, we're good?
I'm done. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Van Holst, I see a hand up, but I'm not sure if that's a hand up, a hand out, or a hand down. So having said that, I see it down now. So with that, perhaps what I can do is ask the clerk to read the motion that we should have seen in advance. Please go ahead. And we're reading because for the benefit, obviously, of those who don't have this in front of them. So clerk, if you would, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion reads as follows, that the following actions be taken with respect to the 2019 Annual General Meeting of the Housing Development Corporation, London. Part A, the presentation by S. Justizia, Housing Development Corporation, London, be received. Part B, the proposed bylaw appended to the staff report dated June 9th, 2020 as Appendix A, entitled A Bylaw to Ratify and Confirm the Annual Resolutions of the Shareholder of the Development Corporation, London, be introduced at the Municipal Council meeting to be held on June 16th, 2020, to ratify the annual resolution of the shareholder and to authorize the mayor and the city clerk to execute the annual resolution of the shareholder of the Housing Development Corporation, London. Part C, the Housing Development Corporation London 2019 Annual Shareholder Report be received. And Part D, the financial statements of the Housing Development Corporation London year ended December 31st, 2019 be received.
Colleagues, before I look for a mover and seconder, they always say you miss the one you like. Councillor Morgan is as close to me as 2 meters apart and a bit can be, but he did have his hand up. I did not notice. So before we look for a mover and a seconder, perhaps I can ask or call in Councillor Morgan, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And my fault. I thought I had gotten on the list, but I'm not used to using my regular hand for getting on lists. So I'll have to get back into the swing of things. First off, let me just say, with respect to the report, I think that there is no doubt that there's excellent and impactful work being done by the HDC. And so thank you to Mr. Cooper and Mr. Gastizia and the team behind you for both the report and the work that you're doing each and every day. I'm very supportive of the resolutions before us. And I think particularly the shareholder resolutions are important, and I think that some of the context within them is key too. I certainly recognize that I have been challenging to the HDC in the past, but my ultimate goal in this is to simply ensure that we're getting the most value we possibly could out of the money we're spending and the most impact that we can get for those who need affordable options in the City of London. To that end, I know we initiated a review, and I think the election of the interim director for a period until the next shareholders meeting or until the completion of that review, depending on what the options are, is an appropriate shareholder resolution to make. At the end of the day, I certainly will support the results of whatever that review is, because although I certainly recognize the excellent work that the HDC is doing, the City of London was doing excellent work under a different model. And at the end of the day, all we want to do is ensure that we are driving the most possible value with the most possible impact for those Londoners who need it. And so I think our actions and the shareholders' actions today are highly appropriate. I think they're an appropriate step in the process, and I'll look forward to Civic Administration's report on the completion of the review so that we can ensure that there are no further distractions to the important work that is being done by all on this file in the city.
Thanks very much, colleagues. You've heard the motion on the floor. I'll look for a mover, please. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Morgan. We will call the vote. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 15-0.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. D'Souza, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Dickens for your presentation today as we move to the next point of our agenda, which is the London Middlesex Community Housing 2019 meeting of shareholders. We have representing LMCH, Andrea McKenzie and Paul Yeoman. I will remind them they have 10 minutes maximum presentation and then open for any questions that may come their way. Ms. McKenzie, Mr. Yeoman, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of Council. It's a pleasure to be here before you in the capacity of Board Chair for the London and Middlesex Community Housing as we provide the shareholder with highlights of our housing activities for 2019. Before we begin, I'd like to formally introduce Andrea McKenzie, who will be speaking with you this afternoon. Andrea has been appointed by the Board to serve as Interim Chief Executive Officer for our organization. She's been with the LMCH for many years, recently serving as Director of Tenant Administration. We're very fortunate to have Andrea providing focused and collaborative leadership to this organization at a key time. With that, I'll turn things over to Andrea and she'll provide you with our annual report summary.
Ms. McKenzie.
Thank you. Technical difficulties. Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of Council. On behalf of London Middlesex Community Housing, I'm pleased to present our 2019 annual report. I'm proud to be here representing the staff team, board of directors, and most especially our tenants. If you turn to slide 2 in the presentation, in 2019, we established 390 new tenancies, providing RGI housing for youth, families, and seniors. And we were able to save approximately 370 tenancies through work to establish either mediated agreements at the Landlord-Tenant Board or through referrals to supports such as the connectivity table. We also began to collect more tenant demographic information, and this data will help to inform how tenant needs may be changing, to identify supports that may be beneficial, and to plan for the future as we continue to build on this data over time. And turning to information related to our tenants, we now have just approximately 5,400 tenants across both London and Middlesex County. And as you see on slide 3, the income sources demonstrate that there is a diversity among our tenants. And we know that these income sources are mirrored by many others in the community who could benefit from access to rent geared to income housing. Parallel to the important work around our tenants and buildings, LMCH has also developed greater financial sophistication in 2019 while we continue working with our zero-based budgeting. Slide 5 of our presentation is a brief snapshot of our finances. This year brought forward shifts in our operating model as we began to focus on our core mandate, which is to provide rent geared to income housing. We ended fiscal 2019 with an operating deficit of approximately $363,000, as you'll note, but this was an anticipated deficit as additional dollars were spent to address vacancies. Slide 6 speaks to a couple of areas of impact for us in 2019. We restored 426 units, and as you can imagine, when a tenant moves out, we were required to assess the unit and evaluate the level of work that is needed to be done to prepare it for a new tenant. The range of work to restore units is considerable. Between our maintenance repair team and external contractors, units are now being turned over much more efficiently. LMCH additionally fielded and completed over 20,000 maintenance requests last year, which can include anything from a simple lock change to plumbing leaks. Slide 7 highlights LMCH's focus on developing an asset management plan as well as creating a capital replacement strategy during 2019. Both of these initiatives will contribute significantly to improving organizational effectiveness and providing better outcomes for our tenants. Slide 8 highlights some of our capital investments. Thanks to additional funding through the province's Social Housing Apartment Improvement Program, or SHAPE, exterior works such as solar walls and cladding projects were prioritized. These dollars also contributed to the make-up error projects captured in the almost $1.5 million allocated to mechanical and plumbing projects in 2019. With this level of funding, LMCH has been able to begin the necessary upgrades and improvements to our assets, contributing to a better overall look and feel of the buildings. 2019 has been one of the largest program years of capital spending for us in recent years. $5.1 million was budgeted through the SHAPE program, along with the City of London's annual allotment of $2.1 million for capital improvements. We are continuing to create partnerships with organizations to improve tenant experiences. In 2019, we worked with 63 community partners who provided 142 different programs to LMCH tenants. The outcome of these collaborations is greater tenant support, and it will also help to promote community integration. One highlight was a post-secondary preparedness program that we helped to pilot, and it worked to create and facilitate opportunities for residents to improve their lives through education. As a result, 4 of the 7 program attendees applied to post-secondary schools and will become the first in their families to go to college. Turning to slide 11 in the presentation, a key theme in 2019 was planning for our future through the multi-year budgeting process. We laid the groundwork for executing our regeneration plan, closing the infrastructure gap, increasing our operational and community safety, staff, and pursued co-investment funding from CMHC. LMCH transitioned to a new board of directors composed of civic administration, and the board has continued to steer the organization while overseeing the governance of some key priorities, including unit restoration and tenant retention, processes and policies, as well as the development of a risk mitigation strategy. And finally, as we turn the page from 2019 to 2020, we entered this year with a dedicated focus to provide safer homes and build healthy communities. We will continue to prioritize vacancy management, better customer service, strong partnerships, and on executing our strategies to engage and empower our tenants to work cohesively with LMCH in order to improve our communities together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKenzie. I'll look for comments, questions. I see Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. The first question is, I asked Mr. Gutasia earlier about the regeneration plan of London Middlesex community housing. I also saw that it was mentioned in your presentation, but not mentioned by you. I wonder if you might help me out, since it was one of the things that was most on council's mind when we passed our budget. So the question quite simply is where are you on your regeneration plan? Is it in place? Is it starting? Where are we?
Ms. McKenzie.
Yes, through your worship. Thank you for the question. As Mr. Justicia mentioned, we have been working closely with HDC as we have an understanding of the importance of getting this work right. And we're in the pre-development stage right now. So pre-development has been occurring and we've identified the various stages of development, and we're completing the tasks within these first stages. So as of right now, we have identified and ranked the top 3 priority sites for regeneration. And we are doing as much due diligence as possible to ensure that we select the community that's going to allow for the most impact in terms of establishing a healthy, vibrant, and connected community. And over the coming weeks and months, we will refine site-specific regeneration goals. So we will create draft development concepts and then complete feasibility assessments on the draft development concepts. Concurrently, we are drafting policy documents surrounding regeneration that include a tenant relocation policy, tenant engagement and communications policies, as well as an affordable rental rate policy. And these policies will all help guide and inform developmental goals, concepts, and the way in which we're going to engage with the broader community as well. Our tenant relocation policy, I want to highlight, is going to include how we will communicate clearly and early and work alongside our tenants, and where we can allow them to have a say in how the community is going to be rebuilt. And it will also include language around tenants' right to return. We're committed to offering the greatest level of affordability where possible while ensuring financial sustainability. And another key piece to articulate is just that we will be working on our new strategic plan, either later this year or early in the new year. And obviously, regeneration is going to be a key focus of that plan.
Councillor Squire.
Okay, I might be able to comment on your answer later, but the other issue I wanted to ask you about, and when I look at your financial statements, the City of London has been making a contribution fairly consistent between $10 and $11 million every year, with rental just about $1 million ahead of that, which I think is important to realize. The accumulated surplus you have right now at London Middlesex Community Housing is about $54,281,000. I just want to understand the purpose of the surplus and where that surplus might be applied.
Ms. McKenzie?
I'm sorry, you'd have to direct me, Councillor Squire. I'm not familiar with the $54 million surplus.
It appears on page 99, the London and Middlesex Community Housing Inc. Statement of Operations, year ended December 31st, 2019, right at the bottom.
Just give us one moment, please. I'm going to ask my Director of Finance to just respond.
And to be clear, that's the KPMG auditor's report that is shown page 90, our page 99, yes.
Through the worship, the surplus relates to the tangible capital assets and the value that our assets carry on our balance sheets. This does not speak to an operational surplus that we can deploy for any type of operations.
Thank you.
Councillor.
One more question. Now that the changes have been made to the board, I guess whether I'm speaking for myself or not, I think some councillors have expressed a desire to get back to a situation where we have representation in the form of councillors on the board. And I wonder if you're able to provide any clarity today, either the current chair of the board or anybody, as to when we might get back into a situation where it would be advisable to have elected councillors serving on your board.
Through your worship, it's Mr. Yeoman. So the board is quite clear of the priority that council has, given the nature of our interim period on the board, and making sure we're working towards a community-based board in the very near future. We are working on finalizing our work plan right now. This is a key component of that. We're targeting the end of this year or early next to have recommendations before you regarding that. We'll also be doing engagement with the shareholder and with the county on this matter as well.
Councillor Squire.
And this is just a comment, and I'll do it now if that's okay. I'm having sat here for 6 years. I understand where you are on your regeneration plan, but I'm going to be frank. I don't think you're much further ahead than we were quite a while ago. The wording that I'm hearing is very much the same wording that I heard from the last administration and that we heard from the last board. I don't blame you for that. I just think we have to accept the reality that it appears to me we've made very little progress in the regeneration of London Middlesex community housing, which at least to me is disappointing.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Ms. McKenzie for her presentation, and congratulations on your interim director of London Middlesex Community Housing as well. You mentioned in your presentation about the deficit of 363,000 that went into addressing the vacancies that were a concern, and I'm glad to see that we have been able to deal with the vacancies. I wonder if you can explain a little bit more where we are with vacancies to date.
Ms. McKenzie.
Through you, your worship. Thank you for the question. We, in looking back at the KPMG report from last year, in June of last year, they had identified that we were sitting with 118 units that were waiting to be restored with our property services team. So that equated to about 3.6%. I can tell you that as of the end of May of this year, we now have just 60 units that are waiting to be restored, which is approximately 1.8% of the total. And we have seen some pretty dramatic decreases in those numbers, with the dedicated focus that we've been able to put on this. And so we should, the intent is to have the total number of units that are in active restoration to always be at 2% or below. So we are achieving that as of right now.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, thank you for that, and congratulations. I know when I sat on the board, vacancies were always a challenge and a concern, and I know it's not easy getting them, these units up for rentals again, and so it's good to see the numbers come down like this. I would like to just follow up with Councillor Squire's question about the interim board that we put in place a month or two ago. And I understood at that time we were going to be looking at that interim board sort of going towards the fall of 2020. I understand HDC is looking at their interim board there. And just following up on Mr. Yeoman's answer to Councillor Squire's question about when we can expect a new community board set up, you had mentioned that it would be sort of more towards the end of this year or possibly next year. And I wonder if you could just add a little bit or give a little bit more comments about the extension that we're looking at for this board.
I'll ask Mr. Yeomans to respond, but colleagues, as I recall, I think the city manager at one point not so long ago provided information to us that was consistent with what Mr. Yeomans has said, but I'd rather have Mr. Yeomans confirm that, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. So your current board has been in place for approximately a month and a half right now. And so we haven't quite fully turned our attention or minds to the steps that are required to move towards a community board. It is a priority for us, and it's what we will be actioning very, very soon. As I mentioned, in addition to our duties as board members, this is a project that's key that we'll be working on, that we'll be advancing to provide a community recommendations to council for a community board, hopefully by the end of the year, if not by very early next year.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I appreciate that. Mr. Chair, I understood differently than you did. I thought we were looking at in the fall, but I understand there's a lot of work to be done. We've got these two boards that are being reevaluated, and look forward to getting information from this interim board as to our next steps.
Thank you, and I think we all do. Colleagues, I am going to ask the clerk to read the motion that will be before you. Before we do, I'd like to welcome and thank Ms. McKenzie, and I would say that going from 118 units to 6 units that have been refurbished and available and rented out, I think that that to me feels like regeneration. So with all of that, I'm going to ask the clerk to read the motion, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, the recommendation that's drafted reads as follows: that the following action be taken with respect to the 2019 annual general meeting of London and Middlesex Community Housing. Part A, the presentation from London and Middlesex Community Housing be received. Part B, the proposed bylaw appended to the staff report dated June 9th, 2020 as Appendix A, entitled A Bylaw to Ratify and Confirm the Annual Resolutions of the Shareholder of London and Middlesex Community Housing, Inc. be introduced at the Municipal Council meeting to be held on June 16th, 2020 to 1. Ratify and confirm the annual resolution of the shareholder of London and Middlesex Community Housing, Inc. And Part 2 is to authorize the mayor and the city clerk to execute the annual resolution of the shareholder of London and Middlesex Community Housing. Part C, London and Middlesex Community Housing Audit Findings Report for the year ending December 31st, 2019 be received, and the financial statements of the London and Middlesex Community Housing, Inc. year ended December 31st, 2019 be received.
Thank you. Do we have a mover? Councillor Squire, seconded by Councillor Lewis. I'll call the vote. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
You should still be. Oh, mine.
Councillor Sully, yes.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis was yes. Thank you. Some of us heard him. Councillor Silly was yes. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire. Yes. Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, and the motion's passed 15-0.
I'd like to thank Ms. McKenzie and Mr. Yeoman for your presentation. Thank you kindly as we now welcome Gabe Valenti and Vinay Sharma from London Hydro for the 2019 annual meeting of shareholders. I would remind Mr. Sharma, this is 5 minutes more than I gave you last time, so we have 10 minutes, and then there may well be some questions after that, so we'll turn over to you, gentlemen. Thank you. Could you turn your audio on, Mr. Valenti, please?
There we go. Good afternoon, Your Worship and distinguished council members. Thank you for inviting us today. My name is Gabe Valenti, Chair of the London Hydro Inc. Board. I'm joined here today, as the Mayor has said, by Dr. Vinay Sharma, our CEO. You've been provided with our annual report as well as our annual presentation summary. So to indulge you, Mr. Mayor, we will be more brief than the 10 minutes required. I will simply direct you to slide number 5 within our presentation, and that provides some strong highlights of this year's performance at London Hydro. We continue to focus on our strong growth in shareholder value, evidenced really by return on investment, the annual dividend, and an increase in the asset base of London Hydro for the shareholder. We continue to have good returns, 7% return on equity and deemed equity at 9.9%. With that, we also continue to care for our customers. And that really, our focus has been on maintaining effective cost control, reliability of service, and prudent capital reinvestment so that we can maintain an appropriate infrastructure for servicing. And again, our third point really is to continue in our industry-leading performance, both by investing in technology for our current customer service delivery, as well as investing in applications that have broader application to the industry at large. Fortunately, we've had a wonderful team at London Hydro, certainly from the board's perspective, a senior management team, and all the staff that have generated another banner year for London Hydro Inc. For the City of London. So I would like to publicly thank the board and our senior staff, as well as all the London Hydro staff who've worked diligently, certainly in midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of our priorities was maintaining a safe workplace as an essential service. Our staff have engaged in operating safely and continuing operations for our stakeholders. So Dr. Sharma and I are available for questions. We'll leave it at that unless Vinay has some other comments to make.
Dr. Sharma, how can I deny you?
Your Worship, thank you. Good evening, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Really, I don't have to add more to our chair's comments. Just a slide before that, slide number 4 gives the highlights of our financial performance. I think everything is there for you to see. It has been certainly a banner year. And I just want to express, Your Worship, that our employees, I'm so proud of them today. As I sit here to present our 2019 given the current situation, our employees have done stellar work. Not a single beat has been missed. We are achieving all our budgeted plans, continuing with our own, all the strategic initiative. And thank you, and thanks to the board that has been work. Mr. Your worship, my summary comment.
Thank you. We'll now see if colleagues have questions. I'm going to start with Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you both for the comments and the presentation, and of course the report, and as you just said, all of the work that each of the employees do. I certainly understand that this is a report on 2019, but I think shareholder meetings are also an opportunity to talk about outlook. And in the report on finance, it mentions the potential impacts of COVID-19, specifically that the current challenging economic climate may lead to adverse changes in cash flow, working levels of capital, and or debt balances, which may also have a direct impact on the company's operating results and financial position in the future. And so my question is, do you have a sense yet on whether what the impacts of this will be moving forward, and should the city be counting on a stable dividend coming out of London Hydro, given the potential impacts of COVID-19?
Councillor Morgan, I'm interrupting. Could I ask colleagues, please, and our guests, could you please put it on mute? Because there is some static in return, so we appreciate your support. Thank you.
So to be brief, is COVID-19 going to have an impact on your future operating results? Do you know that yet, and what can we expect in the future?
Dr. Sharma.
Thank you. Through your worship, yes, in March, when it began, we were concerned, and we did some analysis looking at various scenario options, best scenario, worst scenario, and most likely scenario, and we shared with our board our assessment. However, as I am sitting here today in front of you, I have to give you some good news. Much of those scenario that we thought of have not panned out. We have been very lucky. Our cash flow challenges have not really come to fruition. We are managing our cash flow very soundly. Our customers have been very supportive as well. Our performance for this year and next year remains as planned. Our regulators also stepped up to assist us in that situation. So, Councillor Morgan, our performance for 2020 will be as budgeted, as planned, and our net income will be as we forecast in our budget of $8 million or more. And our dividend for this year will be maintained as they have been maintained in the last few years. 2021 also looks very promising, even though that is our last year of 5-year rate making cycles. So given that's last year, we will have some less reduced net income. However, our commitment to maintaining the dividend to the city will be there.
Thank you, and again, I appreciate the work. Obviously, council will be discussing, its financial situation, and it's good to hear that that those flows from London Hydro seem stable at this time. So thank you for the work of you and all of your team.
Thanks very much. I have no other speakers on the list, so I will turn to, we had a couple sneak in there. Please use, when you can, your arms raised, because I can't see everybody on the screen, but I see Deputy Mayor Helmer and Councillor Van Holst.
First, I just wanted to make a comment, which is I'm really glad to see the numbers around system performance in particular, especially the longer term trend down in the duration and in number of interruptions. That's quite a great result, and I don't want it to just kind of go by unremarked. I think people many times take for granted that when they flick the switch, the power is going to be on, and that when things go wrong, it'll be fixed quickly. But that's partly because we have a really high performing utility that's been improving consistently since 2000. So I think that's something I just wanted to draw attention to, something that I know people in my part of the city pay pretty close attention to. I did have a question. I know that the term for some board members is up for renewal, and I certainly support that, the 3-year extensions, but I wanted to ask about the length of tenure. I know you have a general practice of having quite long serving board members. who have done great work for the organization over time. I wonder about the reappointments next year and sort of where that is headed.
Dr. Sharma?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, I will let Chair also comment on it, but I want to just share this thought that in a regulated business like ours, it is to our benefit that we maintain a consistent knowledge of our board members, and long-term tenure certainly helps. So, however, in the last 3 years, we have been renewing our board members. Actually, we have had 3 new appointments. So our average tenure of the board is actually been reducing lately. And I'm concerned because earlier we were maintaining average tenure of about 7 to 9 years. Now I'm below 6 years. So that's why this year there's no change. However, in future, I anticipate change will be there, but not as frequent as some other might like. We would like to see a tenure of 7 to 9 years to be maintained average on our board. Mr. Chair, if you want to add any more comment to that.
Mr. Valenti?
Thank you, through your worship, Mr. Helmer, Councillor Helmer. We have taken in consideration, an appropriate board turnover. Unfortunately, we had departures of some board members, unfortunately, and some who had to leave. And we were challenged with the fact that there is a significant learning curve in the regulated environment. And it really, I know in speaking with some of the newer board members, really does take 3 or 4 years for you to feel comfortable with understanding and being able to add value. And we've had quite good discussions in our strategic planning sessions about what would be an appropriate tenure and average tenure for the board. So these specific requests this year for extensions are exactly to mitigate the issue that Vinay has raised, so that there's an appropriate mentoring being done with the new board members, and allowing them an opportunity to get a good foothold on the knowledge base of the regulated utility environment. I think that's actually proven to be part of our success, is some level of continuity. That being said, I'm a firm believer in fresh blood, and I can tell you that the addition of our new board members has been stellar, and I thank council for being highly involved in that process and understanding our needs assessment for skills at the board level. So I think you will see in the coming years, as more board members become comfortable and truly able to build their skill and knowledge base, that some of us old dogs will be moving on.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and I appreciate sometimes these conversations can be a bit tricky to navigate, and it's nothing personal, obviously. It's just there is a fine line between independence and long tenure, and sometimes you have long-serving board members of organizations who over time kind of lose their independence from management. I'm not saying that's happening now, but it's something you have to keep in mind, as you know, from a governance perspective. I wonder, this will be my final question, in terms of the governance, if you're considering an expansion. There's certain discussions around size of the board. Have you considered going to, say, 9 members so that you could have even more granular staggering and less risk of losing long-serving members and losing that knowledge that builds up over time?
Mr. Valenti or Mr. Sharma?
For you, Your Worship, for you, I add one comment, and that is, as councillors are aware, we are looking at the restructuring of Land Hydro to make ourselves avail the marketing opportunities for our technology. So through that, there will be some restructuring and added corporation, holding company, as well as retail affiliate. So board structure will change, and we have proposed a certain level. 7 board members are optimal for a OEB regulated industry given our size. So I feel comfortable with staying with that 7, but there will be an expanded oversight of various corporations when we have other boards member also, like that of Holdco company, that add value as well. Mr. Chair, if you want to add anything more to that.
Mr. Valeni?
Thank you, and through your worship, I think that's absolutely correct. Good point. We have had consideration in our strategic planning discussions almost every year about the size of the board. We're really following practice norm recommendation of the OEB. We've found that we function well at the current number, but again, all knowing that in light of opportunities becoming available through a modified structure, that that discussion will be had again, and strategically, it's likely that we will be addressing greater capacity at the board level, and hopefully that will again mitigate some of the continuity risk if we have some other board members to call upon. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor? Good, thank you. I have, excuse me, I have Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, first I'd like to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that was done for London Hydro in the city by our ex-chair, Mohan Mathur. Is a great loss to our city and the corporation that he passed away in January. This one, I also want to thank Deputy Mayor for having his eye on the ball and seeing some of the tremendous value that's being produced for our citizens by our London Hydro staff. And for that reason, maybe I'll just ask a question through you to Mr. Sharma. People see our trucks out all the time, and they are out all the time working. What percentage of the time might we be fixing something that's broken versus improving something, improving the system for later on? And how long will those improvements last?
Sharma.
Your Worship, Councillor Van Holst, so we have three sort of level of programs. One is our own refurbishment of our capital asset, which have aged over time. Second is we modify or upgrade when our city is doing widening of roads and whatnot. And third is outages that happen due to either a faulty equipment or through damage by a car accident or a weather-related damage. So our assets, whenever we get a chance, either because of outage or because of road widening, we try to install new up to the standard equipment. And our assets actually last quite long. All our assets from overhead line to poles to transformers, they are very long-term assets, something in the order of 20 years to 40 years amortization and the life cycle. However, what we are doing more to enhance the resiliency of the system and minimize the outages is technology usage whenever we come to upgrade any part of the system. And the technology such as more digital fault location, more machine decision-making to automate the restoration of the faulty equipment, and as well as adding more fault indicators, and sometimes even looking at proactive measure of heat generation, even though it's not a fault, but there's a heat generation. So we take proactive measure to go and address that issue before it becomes an outage. So our system therefore provide us greater resiliency and reliability, but our assets as such last very, very long.
Okay.
Councillor?
And Your Worship, just one more clarification. The kinds of fault detection and automation that go on, when there is a fault, how fast can our system restore power to someone if there were to be a fault?
Thank you.
Dr. Sharma, you not only get to answer that question at the board meeting, but at other places as well. Please go ahead.
Your Worship, yes, indeed. What happens is, depending upon where the fault is, we have three distinct levels of our distribution grid. One is a network level, one is a feeder level, and then one is the local service that goes to a house or a business. If it is on a feeder or a network level, then we can reroute the power without physically going to the site. And we do through our automation switches that we have from our control room, which is a 24/7 control room. So that kind of outage, we can restore everybody within about few minutes. And I'll give you an example of one. However, if it is to the last mile that goes to somebody's home, the damage takes a little time, because that would require a physical repair to that last mile going to a premise. And for example, nobody in London ever realized that we had a transformer failure at Hydro One supply point. Nobody realized we automatically rerouted the power. Nobody saw an interruption of any kind. There might have been a momentary interruption when we were transferring some loads back and forth, but within few minutes, everybody was normal. So those are the kind of response times we have to our outages. That's why you see the reliability curves in our slide presentation on slide number 11 shows you duration going down. That's because of automated switches. Right now in the entire city of London, we have 264 automated switches that we can control remotely.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst, we're good?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, thank you for your thoughtful comments about Dr. Mohan Mather as well, a real gentleman. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you to both for your presentation. Always fun to ask questions at these, and every year there's some new things. A couple ones that just kind of jumped out at me, and I'm glad Councillor Helmer raised the systems performance. Those are really impressive trends to see the number of interruptions like hovering around 1 per year, and that interruption is less than 3/4 of an hour. That's phenomenal. That's some pretty reliable service. My questions were one about in the slide afterwards, it talks about engaging customers online. Talks about 20,000 payment notifications sent, or about 10,000 subscriptions, paperless subscriptions. When I look at that, I'm estimating that there's about 160,000, 170,000 households, dwellings in London. I'd imagine when you put corporate and businesses in there, you probably have about 200,000 or plus customers, discrete customers for London Hydro, who all receive a monthly bill. So it never really tweaked on me until I saw this, and then I was thinking about that. I think the business rate for mail is like 90 cents a bill, and so that's like $200,000 a month in postage, or about $2.4 million. Is that right? $2.4 million a year in postage, with operating expenses of about 46 million. So that's about 5% of the operating expenses outside of your purchase of electricity, just on postage. Is that accurate? Does that sound reflective? Or and if so, then how much of a push is there to move everybody towards some sort of electronic billing?
Dr. Sharma.
Through your worship, the numbers that you see on slide 12 on the right-hand side, please note, they are incremental gains only for 2019. In total, however, as we note in our annual report letter, there are 68,000 customers that are on paperless billing. So really half of our customer base is on paperless billing. And we are gaining more every month and every year. And this is because of the automation and the convenience and application that we have added to our customer technology side. So your estimated about 2.4 million in billing cost is a little bit over. I think our overall stamp and milling paper billing cost for all customers would be around $1.5 million. and we are saving half of that right now because of the 50% customers are on paperless billing. So that's a rough estimate, but indeed you're right, it is a saving. On a sort of individual paperless bill, we save $10 a year on the paper bill.
Wonderful. Okay, that's very helpful. That makes a bit more sense. I was wondering if these were incrementals or if that was just the total. That makes a ton more sense. The second one was a little weird. Was I didn't know how to convert the number of injury-free hours into real hours. Is that like person hours worked, or is that 883,000 hours is 10 years?
Yeah.
So that seems a little high.
Dr. Sharma?
Through your worship, yes, 883,344 hours person hours. So we are a 300 employee workplace, so that, 8 hours a day, you can see that's a 24,000 hours or 300 times 8, 2,400 hours a day we accumulate. So this, in a year, we will be accumulating about 610,000 hours, working hours, and this is more than a year worth of no injury at all. And the one that really stopped us in our progression was a small in-office slip that caused that. Otherwise, everything was going very good until then.
Councillor?
That's phenomenal, and that shows a lot of commitment towards a safety culture, especially in an industry that can be has some inherent hazards with it. So, congratulations and thanks for your presentation.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosi?
Thank you, Your Worship. A follow-up question in regards to slide number 12. Billing cycle or two back during COVID, an email came out to hydro customers saying that we were being transferred into paperless billing. Just wondering, and then you had to log into your hydro account to opt out and then go back to your paper one. Just wondering how that was going and how the public perception, how we received it as customers.
Dr. Sharma?
Through your worship, yes, indeed. First of all, because of COVID-19 infection and whatnot, we didn't want paper handling anywhere, whether in the office or anywhere else. So that was the strategy behind promoting paperless billing. We promoted this to all customers, and customers have the option to opt out either through online or they can call our customer service call center. However, we had, among all the emails, we had only 2 complaints. One came to the counselor and one came directly and nobody else. And those customers were offered to opt out if they wished.
Councillor Pelosi?
No, that's perfect. And myself as a customer, I'm transitioning quite nicely. So thank you for that encouragement.
Thank you. I see no other speakers. I'd like to thank Dr. Sharma and Chairman Valenti, and I will ask the clerk to read the motion, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, the recommendation reads as follows, that the following actions be taken with respect to the 2019 Annual General Meeting of London Hydro, Inc. Part A, the presentation from V. Sharma, CEO, and G. Valente, Board Chair, London Hydro, Inc. be received. Part B, the proposed bylaw appended to the staff report dated June 9th, 2020 as Appendix A, entitled A Bylaw to Ratify and Confirm the Annual Resolutions of the Shareholder of London Hydro, Inc. be introduced at the Municipal Council meeting to be held on June 16th, 2020 to 1. Ratify and confirm the annual resolution of the shareholder of London Hydro, Inc. appended to the staff report dated June 9th, 2020. And Part 2, authorize the mayor and the city clerk to execute the annual resolution of the shareholder of London Hydro, Inc. Part C, the 2019 report on finance for London Hydro, Inc. be received.
Thank you. Do we have a mover? Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Pelosi. I will call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins. Councillor Hopkins? Councillor Hopkins? That might be a frozen screen. We'll swing back to the councillor. Councillor Van Meerbergen?
Yes.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага?
Yes.
Councillor Hillier?
Yes.
I'll vote yes, and I'll see what status we can determine with Councillor Hopkins.
Is she? Closing the vote and the motion's passed 14-0.
Thanks very much, colleagues. And again, thank you, Dr. Sharma and Mr. Valenti. I appreciate that very much. Colleagues, I'm going to turn your attention to items for direction. There are four. The first is the consideration of appointment to the London Public Library, which requires one appointment. You will see by the list and by the information enclosed, we have 26 individuals who have put their names forward. I've been advised that one of our board representatives, Councillor Pelosa, wants to make some comments, but before this is put on the floor. Councillor Pelosa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The board, or all councillors, were previously sent out last month, the job posting to fill in the London Public Library Board with the request that the appointee would have some legal experience. Out earlier this evening, not too long ago, is a note from Miriam Hammoud, being the London Public Library Board Chair, in which she shares that the board had recommended Chelsea Smith for the appointment to the vacancy. Just wanted to make sure that council is aware of those two items for information.
Thank you. Before we put a motion on the floor, I'm going to ask the clerk in terms of our options and approach that we can go with respect to this. So perhaps I could turn that over to you, clerk.
Certainly, through the chair, the committee certainly has the option to take the recommendation that's been submitted through the board representative on the committee, which would be a simple motion to make that appointment. Alternatively, the committee could exercise a ballot process, which we're also ready for. I would suggest that given the number of names that we have to work with, that shortening the slate would be required to make that happen.
So I'd like to get a sense before we put a motion on the floor, unless that's inappropriate, just to get a sense from colleagues what your pleasure might be, just to get a sense of direction, whether there's some consensus to go in one way or another, or a preferred methodology, acknowledging that we've got 26 people who genuinely care. By the way, some of those individuals had applied previously and have reapplied. Others are new to this process. But when you look at the backgrounds of these individuals, they certainly appear outstanding. So I'd like to get a sense from colleagues as to just some brief comment as to how you might like to approach it. Again, if you see where the clerk's going with this, one is possibly to shorten the list and then go through a point of voting. The other is to accept a recommendation of the board, library board. What's your pleasure? I feel like an auctioneer. Where do you want to go? But it's really one of those where I'd like to ask that as a question. Councillor Squire.
Just from my own point of view, I was able to go through the list. I have 4 names of people who I think are appropriate to be on a ballot. I have to admit I'm uncomfortable with one person being sort of name put forward and this is going to be the person we just bring a motion. I would rather see, whatever happens, I would like to see a more fulsome slate. So I have 4 names myself. I'm not going to mention them until we get into the nomination process, but that's where I am.
Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I just wonder if perhaps, because the clerk indicated that they would be potentially ready for a ballot process, but we haven't done one of these in a little while, and I wonder if the clerk might want to refresh colleagues in terms of the process, because we no longer are using a process where you have to rank all of the candidates. This is now more of a preferential ballot type of situation. And so I just wonder if the clerk could refresh us on how this process would work.
Plus the bonus of Zoom. So perhaps, clerk, we could go to you and get some clarity as we discuss this briefly. Thanks.
Thank you through the chair. I'll speak first to the balloting process, and then we'll add in what Zoom does for us with that. So this would be set up as an election, and I'm using the air quotes with that, but that's the terminology that our software uses. The slate would be presented to each member, and you would be able to choose one person from the slate, and then we would tally the votes in that regard. And if there was a clear 50% plus one winner from that, then the election would be done. Otherwise, we would move to a secondary round until such time as 50% plus one was achieved. With Zoom, what that will mean is that the chair will call out each member to voice their opinion, and then it would be a verbal statement of their selection, just the same as a yay, nay, or abstain vote.
So is it, maybe just as a point of clarification, if we assume we've got 26 individuals whose names are put forward, does it, I would ask the clerk from a practical standpoint, would we roll call colleagues and ask them to name one name out of those 26? And then as they do that, so no disrespect to Councillor Squire, but I think it's exactly that point, that if there was going to be one name named, that's what we'd be asking each councillor to do to ultimately get to the stage where we can find a clear consensus amongst colleagues. Do I have that understanding correct, clerk?
Through the chair, for the most part. I'm not sure if I've interpreted what you have said clearly. So what I'm suggesting is to first establish a slate. And if that slate was the 26 names, this will be several rounds of voting because there's only 14 members who will vote on this. And so, no, there's a conflict. So we'll have some of those candidates from the 26 who won't receive any votes in the first place. So it will be more practical to at least establish a shorter slate to work with.
Well, I wonder, colleagues, in the interests of being expeditious, but I do not want to compromise democracy as I say that. I wonder if it makes sense to have the 26 on the floor, and then what would happen, just in total, but then ask colleagues to vote their favorite or their choice, excuse me, one vote per, and what that does is I think pretty quickly we'll be able to determine, there may be a couple of rounds, but I think it would quickly determine who would be ultimately the individual that would get consensus amongst colleagues. Is that a reasonable approach to what is kind of a Zoom process we're trying to clean up? Does anyone have any comments about that as a potential approach? I'm not trying to be hard and fast. I'm just trying to work through this in the most thoughtful way that is possible. Comments? Councillor Van Holst, then Deputy Mayor Homer.
Thank you, Your Worship. And to your question, I'm comfortable with that. Since we, in the end, we're appointing one person, we have to make one vote. So if we each had an opportunity to say who our choice would be, then fairly quickly we would have a slate that we could work down on. We'll say that and reflect the comments that you made. Some very excellent candidates here. And actually, there are some candidates that I decided I would not support because I would like to see them on our other board, specifically the London Middlesex Community Housing Board. I think there's some excellent nominees for that board. But I approve of your approach.
It's just one approach, Deputy Mayor.
I just wanted to raise a different possibility, which is identifying at this meeting people who we want to interview, and then conduct some interviews and then make an appointment after having interviewed people. I know that that's always an option. We do that with some appointments to various boards. In this situation, we have a very great number of people. I've certainly read the materials that they've sent in their applications, but there are a lot of good people, and I would be interested personally in hearing from them. I guess it would be over Zoom somehow, doing the interviews and then making a decision about the appointment afterwards.
Councillor Kayabага.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just also wanted to mention that I'm of the same opinion as Councillor Helmer. It's really hard to make a decision when we haven't really interviewed interviewed the people. So if we can make a selection of people that we can interview through the same process that we have interviewed others on different boards, I would second that motion if that's what Deputy Mayor Helmer wants to move.
Do I have any other comments with respect to this? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, given the fact that we are going to be leaving a less than, or working through a less than ideal process with Zoom anyway, we still have to have a process. I'm comfortable with what you suggested. I'm not sure that if we're going to get to the point of interviewing candidates for specific boards, if we don't, because we didn't do this for all the boards. And I get really uncomfortable with the idea that we're going to interview for some positions. We're not going to interview for others. At one point, I question why wouldn't we have the board interview the applicants then, as we've had striking committees do for the initial appointments. So I'm prepared to go ahead tonight and make a decision. I've reviewed the applications. I'm not sure that we're going to get much more from a video call with people than we're getting from paper applications. Honestly, you don't get the body language and the interaction with individuals that way. And I'm also mindful of the fact that the board is making the library board is dealing with adjustments around reopening for COVID. So it'd be great to have an extra member. If folks want to just simply refer this to a meeting when we can all be here in person and do the preferential voting system, I'm okay with that too. But for me, I know we're replacing a female candidate, so I'm going to be looking for another woman to join the board to maintain that gender balance, or as close to it as we can get. And I've reviewed those applications, and I'm ready to vote. And then colleagues will have the results through this new system of voting that we came through the governance working group with. So I'm not comfortable with interviewing by Zoom.
Okay, sorry, I cut you off. Thank you, Councillor Squire.
Because I'm known as such a reasonable person, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to agree to the process that you're suggesting. With regard to the interview process, I've never supported the interview process. I want to be careful here because it was in camera. Let's just say this, that I participated once in an interview process. I will not do it again.
Any other comments or questions it looks like we've got two options to consider in just a moment. Any other comments or questions before we ask for a motion in one direction or whatever that might be? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you. I do apologize. I froze and I'm back here, so I may not have all the conversation, but I am, from what I've heard, I would suggest that there is a suggestion to have two models to go forward. Maybe we can put the suggestion of going to an interview process on the floor and we can vote on that. Would be my suggestion. I think there's a lot of really good candidates. I'm having a hard time trying to sort it out, and an interview process is a way of sorting that out. So I would be supportive of doing that. We've done it before for boards. For sure, we don't do it on every board, but I think depending on what the slate and is that this is an opportunity where we can interview great candidates. So I would suggest that that motion be put on the floor. I'll go to the mover and the seconder, and I'll leave it at that.
I'd like to keep it open for a bit more discussion before we go to a motion, if we could, please. Councillor Kayabага, I may have cut you off or you wanted to come back in to speak again. I'm not sure, but could you take the floor, please?
I'm going to put my hand down because you didn't cut me. It's just I forgot to put it down.
Okay, well, I feel better I didn't do that to you. Any other comments or questions from colleagues? It looks like if I, and by the way, there may well be other approaches, but the two is to shortlist an interview group, and I presume that we would try to find a way to do that tonight, or that based on the other option, which is to, as we will ultimately all get one vote regardless, to have all 26 names on the floor, and we do that individual vote tonight. So I'm going to look for a motion for something to move this along if we could. Councillor Lewis? And I'm sorry, because I didn't see anybody else on the screen with that, and I see Councillor Lewis, so I'm not trying to prefer one approach over the other. Go ahead.
Certainly. So, Your Worship, I'm going to suggest that we go ahead with our usual practice then. And as you suggested, I move that we put the 26 on the floor, and councillors can vote for their preferred candidate and work through until we have a winner.
Is there a seconder for that?
Or a preferred choice, sorry.
I see Councillor Pelosa seconding that. Any comments or discussion on this? And if it passes, that will be the process. If it does not, obviously it does not, and then we consider another approach. Comments or questions? Seeing none, then I will call the question, and I will ask the clerk just to read it, just to be clear. It is still being written, but when it is written, it will be read.
Thank you. Through the chair, what I have drafted is that the committee proceed with an appointment process which would begin with a 26-name slate for consideration of appointments to the London Public Library Board. And that's moved by Councillor Lewis and seconded by Councillor Pelosa.
Thanks very much. When the clerk is ready, then we will call the question. As the clerk continues to be ready, we will soon call the question. Here we are, colleagues. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
No.
Councillor Cassidy.
No.
Councillor Squire. Yes. Councillor Morgan.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
No.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
No.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
No.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, and the motion is passed 9-5 with 1 recuse.
So colleagues, what we have in front of us under 4.1 are 26 names. If there's any clarity that you require from the clerk with respect to this process, what we are looking to do then is in order of Ward 1 through 14, ask colleagues to indicate one name of the 26 that you would that would be your candidate. And then I would ask the clerk just to clarify after that first round, if there is not consensus or majority, what the next step is, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, it's a little bit difficult to predict what the next step will be before we have a result, but it would be a runoff election, and we would determine based on the results the number of names that would drop off the ballot. Presumably that will be at least, I'm trying to do mental math, 12 names, because that's how many exceed the votes that are available.
So just as a point of clarification, that would mean that the lowest vote would drop off, and then we would go through these names again.
That's correct. So any candidate who did not receive any votes would drop off, and then we would drop additional names based on lot.
well, presumably if their name is on, oh, I see what you're saying. All right, fine, that's clear. All right, clearer. Comments or questions about this process? All right, so then if I may, colleagues, turn your attention to the list that is in your package. And I will ask you to indicate one person's name. And through that, we will then determine where we are at the end of that first ballot. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I'm going to put forward the name of the person who's invested more in books and spoken word than, or the written word than anyone else, Mr. Jason Dixon.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Chelsea Smith.
Councillor Salee.
Mandy Penny.
I'm sorry, that didn't come through. Could I ask you, I apologize, Councillor, I couldn't hear.
Mandy Penny.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Anand Desai.
Councillor Cassidy.
Tamim Al-Kadi.
Councillor Squire.
Sam Trossel.
Councillor Morgan is abstained.
Yeah, I've abstained from the process.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Chelsea Smith.
Hold on, colleagues. The clerks just asked for a brief indulgence.
Mr. Mayor, I didn't hear Councillor Squire's name that he put forward.
He put down Sam Trosso.
Thank you.
The confusion was the abstention. We are not naming names. We've recorded Councillor Lehman's vote. Councillor Hopkins, please.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing all the names. So if a name is, I'll mention Mary Dion Sekopoulos.
All right, thank you. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
A legend in the London Public Library system, Alistair Neely.
Councillor Turner.
Sam Trossel.
Councillor Pelosa.
Chelsea Smith.
Councillor Kayabaga.
I'm not going to put any names down again as the two still have the names that have been put down. I'll just vote when we start voting.
This is a vote, though, Councillor.
Oh, this is a vote just for one person?
Well, your choice of that, whomever you choose, but this is the first round of votes.
Mandy Penny. Mandy Penny.
Thank you. Councillor Hillier.
Mr. Chair.
We're in a voting process. Was this a point of order, Councillor?
Yes, if I
Please.
may.
Yeah,
Sorry
please.
to interrupt, just trying to figure out the rules here. So the person's name that you put forward is the person that you have to appoint as number one?
All one gets,
Ballot?
based on the rules, everyone gets one, this is our first round, everyone gets one vote. And according to the information we have received from the clerk, those individuals who got no votes will drop off for the second round, and there may be some 10 individuals, by virtue of it getting at least one vote, goes to the second round. That's correct.
So in other words, you can put forward a name, but you don't have to necessarily vote for that name.
That name is your first vote for your first round.
Is it?
That doesn't mean, by the way, sorry, Councillor, it doesn't mean you can't change your vote come the second round. But what we have, what we are looking for ultimately is consensus. And at this point,
Okay, so if I may, is there a way that I can change my vote? Because I was unclear with the rules here, and I would like to change my vote then if I have to be consistent, I guess, with my voting. I should change my vote.
on the advice of the clerk, she is suggesting that we start over. But before we do that, can I ask, is there any other question about that this vote, that this first round is a vote? And if someone does not get a vote on the first round, their names will be dropped. And as we go to the second round, we will see who gets the most, but those with the lowest votes on the second, so if there's a tie for lowest vote, those people drop off. And, or if there's one person with the lowest vote, in other words, we go through as many rounds as it takes, colleagues, to get to the point where we have consensus, or let me just simply say a majority, not so much consensus. Any questions about that?
I'd like to change my vote then.
Well, actually, Councillor, we're going to, we enjoyed the almost full vote so much, we're going to do that again, and so we are going to start with a clean slate. That's the advice of the clerk. So.
Thank you. I apologize.
No, not at all. I appreciate the clarification. So if there's no other question with respect to that, or if there is, please.
I have a point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Or it could be a question. Go ahead, Councillor Karabaga, please.
No, it's Maureen Cassidy.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Thanks. I'll put my video on. So I don't mind this first round determining what the slate will be, what the first slate will be. I'm concerned going forward in subsequent rounds as we indicate our choices. So the 15th voter may make a different choice based on all the other votes previously. And the way we do the ranked ballot in person is more or less a secret, and all of our votes are a secret ballots until the votes are counted. So I'm concerned about this process of Michael Van Holst's vote as number one. He's always number one and doesn't have the benefit of hearing what the other votes are. Or it just seems very strange to me.
So noted. Thank you. I've got Councillor Lewis that also would like to respond because we have opened this up to questions. Go ahead, please, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I actually share Councillor Cassidy's concern, which was one of the reasons I asked the clerk to provide us a little bit of an explanation before we started down this path. I still share that concern, Councillor Cassidy. I'm with you 100% on this. So understanding that we've approved this process doesn't mean that we have to finish it today. So I'm going to move that we refer this to a future meeting of SPPC where all members can vote via secret ballot, and we'll allow.
Okay,
Sorry,
I see a
clerk's
motion, but I
waving
know
at
the
me
clerk
there,
does
Councillor
want
Cassidy.
to make a comment. Clerk, go ahead.
Just to clarify, it's not a secret vote. Because you're voting electronically and you have the screen in front of you, you can't see what each other are voting on. We can certainly see the vote. It is not a secret vote.
My sense is that's what both councillors meant as well.
Yes, so that it's private until such time as the votes are cast. So Councillor
Lewis has put a motion to refer this until such time as this can be done electronically. referral takes priority. Is there a seconder for that? Or
Well, I raise a point of order.
go ahead, Councillor Van Holst.
We've initiated a voting process and voted to approve it. I think it's highly irregular that we're having this discussion. We're just a few votes away from having a reduced slate, and I think that will provide some information. I would say we should just proceed, and Chair, you can make a ruling, and perhaps it'll be challenged, but I would like to see us complete the process that we've voted and approved.
If that feels like, to me, like discussion as a result of a motion that's on the floor. Is there a seconder to the motion? And then you can challenge the chair. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hillier, comments or discussion?
Well,
Deputy Mayor? Sorry, I saw Deputy Mayor, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Van Holst, please. Deputy Mayor Helmer?
If a referral were to go ahead, in terms of the timeline, when is our best guess about when we might be able to consider this matter in the future?
Clerk?
Through your worship, that's a difficult question to answer. It would depend on what the status is from the province. We have reviewed the council chambers, and we have a plan in place for all of you to be here and maintain the 6 feet distance if you wish to do that. So it could be in July if you wish. It's up to council.
I have Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Cassidy.
Well, thank you. So I think I've raised a point of order, Your Worship, and I think your ruling is to strike that down. So I think we should proceed. Please make a ruling, and then, or if you have, then I'll challenge that ruling, and then we can vote and have this process be transparent.
I would tell you the referral is in order, and a determination was made to reconsider the votes, but then we had the referral, which again, I deem to be in order, and you're welcome to challenge the chair.
Okay, I'll challenge the chair that a referral is not in order when when a voting process, in the midst of a vote. So I believe that has to be put to a vote.
Oh, I know it does. We're just getting I think the smithing ultimately is, do you support the chair? So I will call that as if, oh, we are getting that in writing for you, colleagues, by the clerk. Clerk, go ahead and read it, please.
Thank you. The motion is moved by Councillor Van Holst, and it is that shall the ruling of the chair be upheld? And for clarity, the ruling is to proceed with consideration of the referral motion. So,
any questions about the motion? Then we'll call the question. Councillor Van Holst?
No.
Councillor Lewis?
Yes.
Councillor Salih?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Oh, we're a little ahead. Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy?
Before I vote, do we need a second for this motion?
No.
And yes.
Councillor Squire?
Yes.
Councillor Morgan?
Abstain.
Is abstained. Sorry, man. Councillor Lehman?
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Councillor Van Merbergen?
No.
Councillor Turner?
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa?
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga,
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's carried 12-2 with 1 recuse.
Which means the motion for referral stands. Duly seconded. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Cassidy.
So before we vote on the referral, if we were to proceed tonight, could we not email a ranked ballot, each of us, to the clerk? And then they would have our rankings. And it would be the exact same situation as in council chambers, but rather than handing our ballots physically, we would hand our ballots via email.
That is not the motion, so I will look to the clerk for a moment.
Thank you through the chair. Just for clarity, this is not a ranking, it's 1 vote.
And Councillor Lewis?
Yes, just as a clarification, the method that we used to do where we ranked and handed in a ballot is not the method that we use anymore. Software changes were made, went through governance working group, it was approved by this committee, and we now have the single name process.
So the single name process is something that we might have considered, but Councillor Cassidy, you made the point, and I think it was considered by those that the fairness of Ward 1 through Ward 14 in that order, and ultimately the mayor, that it might be more appropriate if we voted all at once, but do know that we are talking about 1 councillor, 1 candidate. So in terms of 1 vote. So ultimately, be it by mail or be it in an upcoming meeting that we would appropriately physically space, that would be the intent of that process. So any other comments or questions? I have Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not comfortable with where we are at all. Some of my councillor colleagues' questions about this I find quite concerning. That, you know, this is an appointment to a local board, and concerns that we're doing it publicly. And it is true that, you know, in all fairness, you go numerically every time, and it's 1 through 14. And we do hear other colleagues vote before we get our chance to vote. But this is what we've done for all councils and committees. And if this is the concern, recognizing we're not in chambers to vote electronically, and like, I'm just really concerned that colleagues are actually concerned that this is how we vote. This is how we've been voting on everything. And I have concern on that they're questioning it for a board appointment, but not for even things we already submitted tonight. They voted fine with those. And I'm just really concerned that if that's what we're worried about, that maybe we should just only be voting in chambers, period.
I see Councillor Hillier wishing to comment.
Yes, thank you. I am concerned because I do sit here in chair 14 and I do listen and I put little marks down here and I make the final decision technically on who is going to get voted for in the 2nd round. If I decide to pick 2 other names, put them on there, they're on there. Other people are not being acknowledged for their efforts because they're not on this list. I personally would like to see us submit 2 names to the clerk, and then we have a slate and see what the list comes back from that. So we have 2 names each and then see where the numbers fall. Any thoughts on that?
I'm going to ask the clerk to address that, because that is not the direction that they have been given to this point. But I'll look to the clerk. I think this is an important point. So we're talking about this a lot. I know this is an important issue. So I'll look to the clerk for some clarity around that point, and then we will carry on. There is a referral to vote on. If you want to deal with this tonight, you must vote against the referral. If you want it referred to a subsequent meeting, then you'll support it, but perhaps I can ask the clerk.
Through your worship, the motion that currently is on the floor is the referral. Technically, all of the names are on the floor if you weren't dealing with the referral, because they're all on the agenda and made applications. As Councillor Lewis had indicated, A council some time ago approved a new policy, a council policy, and a process as to how to deal with these kind of appointments using the eScribe system, and it is not a ranked ballot. It is different because this time you can hear what each other's votes are, whereas if you were in the chambers, you'd be able to vote electronically using your computer. That's the difference, but this system has been in place for, I think, 6 months or so at least. So again, it is not a ranked ballot process, and that was the decision of council.
I see Councillor Van Holst. Before I recognize him, I want to remind colleagues that this is a discussion about the referral, and we had a couple of points of order, but then there were some questions from colleagues that come as part of this debate. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. So it's interesting, this process of creating a smaller slate is one that we've done before numerous times. We would each add the names that we wanted on the slate and then come up with a smaller slate. And that was the first step in moving forward. So, and I see what we were trying to do could have worked for a number of strategies moving forward. I personally, I don't have a problem with the referral. However, I do think we could come to a decision this evening as well. So depending on other people's comments, I'll vote one way or the other on the referral.
My sense is that if we vote against the referral, we may well deal with this tonight. If we vote for the referral, it is for a subsequent meeting where we can all be in chambers. I think that's what we are hearing. I don't see anyone else there, so, Deputy Mayor Helmer, you're in. Please go ahead.
I support the idea of a referral, although I certainly share colleagues' frustration with what's gone on so far. I voted against the idea of dealing with all 26 candidates and voting right now for several reasons, but one of them was this reason, which is I just don't think we're very well set up to handle this particular kind of matter right now. And I know it's important to fill an appointment on a vacancy on a board, but we have now consumed a lot of time trying to figure out how to make the decision. And I think, frankly, just identifying some people to interview would have been a better way to handle it tonight. Obviously, the group did not agree with that. And so I think the referral is the next best option, which is, I think we need to do this well. I think we need to make a good decision in a good way. And I think we've already seen this is a particular matter where people have widely different preferences. Like people are putting forward all kinds of different people. And so, of course, this is where we are running into a problem with the decision making. And it doesn't happen on things where there's not a big bunch of different options. Like there's not 8 or 9 or 10 or 20 options. There's one option and people are like, yes or no. I think that those are decisions that are easily made in Zoom and are not so problematic from a roll call perspective. It's because there's so many options for one spot that the roll call is becoming a problem where it wasn't before. So I would say referral is probably the best thing we could do at this point in the meeting. And I am a bit annoyed, and I'm sure the library board members are, that the vacancy will continue potentially for a while. But I'm not sure really what else to do at this point.
Clerk?
Thank you through the chair, and with the committee's indulgence, through some very brief and quick discussion amongst the clerks in the room, there may be a way to facilitate this prior to meeting in person. It would require some testing, which we have not yet undertaken, but we may be able to manage this remotely. But it would take a bit of time, but maybe not as much time as it would take to have everybody in attendance. I'll leave that with you in terms of the referral.
So colleagues, I'll just add my own comments. I think that'll, from what I see from the roster, there's no other speakers. This wasn't as complicated, I think, as we might imagine. What we were looking to do, if you recall, was to take the 26. If someone got a vote, they would go to the second ballot, and then we would ultimately do some gradualization down to when we finally got majority. I will not say consensus. I share Councillor Pelosi's comments that we have very publicly, typically led by Councillor Van Holst when there's a large when there's a council or SPPC meeting, because he has the benefit of being from Ward 1, lucky councillor that he is. All to say, knowing that that's the case, by the time this discussion is done, we may have gotten it down to that individual, knowing whoever that might be, knowing that we had a lot of passionate people who believed they'd love to serve on the board, and we would have had no more than 15 names, and by the look of it, probably 8, 9, or 10. But that decision, but I'll support the referral just to bring some clarity to this. I don't think delay will be significant. I'll ask colleagues as well to support the referral. Do you have a wrap-up comment there, Councillor Van Holst? It's not a wrap-up, but I'd like to kind of get this referral to a vote, please, one way or the other. Go ahead.
No, thank you. And I just wanted to say that we may not be as disjointed as Deputy Mayor may think. I had initially made a list of less than 10 people, and 5 of those were suggested by other colleagues. So I do see that we could easily come to a consensus on this, but nevertheless, I think it would be a struggle for us to get there. So tonight, so perhaps a referral will be better. So I will support that.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am pretty much prepared to vote on this, but I do want to quickly ask through you to the clerks, because of the conversation they had about facilitating potentially remote electronic voting. Do we need to, when all members can vote simultaneously? The clerk is ahead of me on that, so that language has been amended.
So let's hear from the clerk.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion for the referral reads as follows: that the matter of the ballot appointment of a member to the London Public Library Board be referred to a future meeting of the SPPC when all the members can vote simultaneously.
That's the referral. So colleagues, let's call the question. Could we please, I'd almost like to go in reverse order, but that has not been our custom, but for fun, that would have been interesting. But let's go through the order that has been our precedent. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
No.
Councillor Pelosa.
No.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-2 with 1 recuse.
Well, that was a worthy dialogue, but I think important because it's the first time that we've dealt with this issue through Zoom. Hopefully the last time it will become an issue through Zoom. Colleagues, I'll bring your attention to 4.2, the resignation note from the Argyle Business Improvement Association of Dale Irwin, who has resigned from the board. I'll look for a motion to receive. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Comments or questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I'll just share with colleagues that the board is actively revisiting other members who sought a position to see if they're still interested. Obviously, the COVID-19 situation is changing some time requirements that some business owners can give. So we were lucky to have Dale, but we had other members who were interested in serving, so hopefully we'll be coming back to you with a new name very soon.
Thank you. May I call the question? Councillor Van Holst. This is to receive. Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's carried 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. 4.3, we have received from the Hyde Park Business Improvement Association a resignation plus a confirmation of appointment. So I will look for a motion to receive. Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Comments or questions? Councillor Morgan?
Yes, I just want to, as a member of the Hyde Park Board of Management, Mandy Hurst, who is resigning, essentially because her business has closed as a result of COVID-19. She wasn't able to withstand the ordered closure. Was an excellent board member, and I want to thank her for her service. It certainly wasn't her choice to have to move on past the board, but she was a great contributor. She was an active member in our committees and subcommittees, and provided a great deal of value. That being said, I think Jean Cole is an excellent replacement for her, but I wanted to recognize Mandy Hurst's contributions to the organization.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll look forward to calling the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Lewis. Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayubaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote and the motion's carried 15-0.
Colleagues, 4.4 is a resignation from the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority. And I'll look for a motion. Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Comments or questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that we'll be following the process, that we will reach out to resumes that we've received for this board and to ask for their desired. I just want to make sure that we do have a list to go to.
I think we all look forward to the list, Councillor, and see how that turns for us. But I'm sure that's absolutely not lost on us. I think that is important. And Chair will explain, Clerk will explain that process.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, unfortunately, we do not have a list. When the appointment was made, we actually had only received one application at that time. So we certainly will be reaching out and advertising, and we will send you the ad. So hopefully you could reach out through your connections to encourage people to apply.
And I wasn't implying there was a list, Councillor Hopkins, as much as I was saying I look forward to the creation of a list, so that there would be an opportunity for us to go through a democratic process and do as we do with that. But I think the point that the clerk has made is quite proper. And for those of colleagues who feel there's someone that would be an appropriate representative that would equally be interested, they can put their name forward. Thank you very much, and that will be promoted appropriately through the clerk's office. So this has been duly moved and seconded. I will call the question unless there are any other. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayubaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm not aware of any deferred matters, but I understand, I think you've received some notice with respect to additional business. I'd like to call on Councillor Salee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for entertaining this. I know in short notice, but as things evolve in our community, I'll just get to it. I just want to put the motion on the floor, and I know the mayor has indicated that he will be seconding it. And I'll just read the motion, and then I'll have comments maybe at the end or after my other colleagues have an opportunity to speak. The motion reads, whereas the Municipal Council of the Corporation of the City of London acknowledges that systemic anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and people of color racism exists in London, and whereas the Municipal Council unequivocally condemns racism in all its forms, and whereas the Municipal Council acknowledges that the corporation's workforce is not reflective of the population it services, and that it will continue to work to ensure a reflective workforce. And whereas the Municipal Council affirms the commitment to help eradicate anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and people of color oppressions, Now therefore be resolved that civic administration be directed to report back to a future meeting of the appropriate standing committee with an update on the implementation of the community diversity and inclusion strategy, providing specific details with respect to the equity inclusion lens of the strategy and the next steps that will be taken to help end racism in London. Colleagues, I'll put that motion on the floor, and just briefly I'll say, this past weekend, some of us in the city of London decided to come out in solidarity, show our support, and say loudly and strongly that Black lives do matter. And it was a historic turnout in Victoria Park with 10,000 Londoners from all walks of lives. But those people were just representatives of so many others that couldn't be there in that park for various reasons. Whether it was people showing their support online, whether it was people showing their support on chalk sidewalks throughout our city from Ward 7 to Ward 12, which I've seen. And as well, we've heard recently from communications and emails from Londoners who have emailed councillors to have their voices heard and to remind us that this is an important step that needs to be taken. And I know this is one of the requests that was made from Black Lives Matter London, as well as many Londoners who've expressed that this is an important step in the process of healing, in the process of moving forward. And I think we need to take this stand, and I look forward to your support.
Thank you, Councillor Slee. As you indicated, it is my intention to second this motion. That is absolutely an honor. It's an important motion. Let me be clear. This isn't where our efforts end. This is where action begins. We know that anti-Black racism exists. We know systemic racism exists. We know both exist here in London, Ontario. The same is true for people of color and our Indigenous friends. And my hope is that all of us on council and all Londoners remember the passion, the hurt, and the urgency we heard from those who spoke at last Saturday's protest. What truly matters now, and what matters even more going forward, is action. We can and must continue to listen. We must continue to talk, but neither should come at the expense of action. In supporting this motion, all of us, I hope, are signaling our commitment to work with members of London's Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, as well as public officials and leaders of institutions, to build a London that reflects on all days the sense of fairness, justice, and unity we witnessed in Victoria Park last Saturday. This has been duly moved and seconded. Any comments or questions? Councillor Kayabага.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to speak on this. I just had some questions regarding this motion. I also support the motion, but I just wanted to understand, it was in the last, right before we had a new manager come in, we did move a motion to approve a specific office for an Indigenous liaison at the City of London, and we haven't heard any updates on that. I'd like to, if the mover and the seconder agree, add on to the motion that we do revise on that and we get a report back where that's at. And I'd also like to if the the mover and the seconder allow me to add on that motion, and also in terms of tracking the measures of what we're doing, and not just that these things just end in motions and the cycle of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism continues in our community. We have to take tangible actions, and we have to be able to measure those actions that we're taking. So it's been a while. We haven't heard back. I don't think we've hired anybody for the Indigenous liaison. At least I haven't heard anything. And we also used to have a diversity and inclusion specialist who is no longer working for the City of London, and the position is still vacant. I'd like to ask staff to give us an update on that. And also, I'd like to suggest that if it's possible to do, I don't know if this is possible to do here, or we'd have to find another place to do this, but I'd like to include that we also create, have that office be Indigenous liaison and reach to the Black community and people of color liaison as well.
Well, why don't we get, if we can, as a starting point, why don't we get some feedback from staff with respect to the Indigenous liaison and the diversity and inclusion specialist? Ms. Livingston, would I take that to you, or can you just help us in this, please?
Yes, Your Worship, I can answer that question. We were in the process of moving forward to recruit for the Indigenous position. We were asked to consult, engage Indigenous communities, our neighboring Indigenous communities in regard to that position, and we were beginning that work. We were hoping to have the person in place by June, but with COVID coming in March, we paused all recruitment, not just this position, all recruitment. So you will see in the strategic plan report coming to you, because this is a specific item in that we anticipate being in a place to have that person in place by the end of the year when we're able to begin recruiting again. With respect to the other position, that position was vacated in late February. And again, we were impacted in terms of COVID and not moving forward with recruitment, first because of the limitations with respect to COVID, and second, with some of our financial pressures. You will know that we have put a pause on all hiring. So that's where we're at. We have full intentions of moving to recruit these important positions. That's where we are with the status in terms of those two. Thank you.
Excuse me, Councillor Kayabага.
Thank you. So thank you for the update, and I do understand the circumstances in which we're in. So I think I'd like to add into the, sorry, am I still here? Okay. My Zoom's been acting really crazy. It keeps going black. So just to add on to what I was saying, and I do understand the circumstances in which we're in, but I would like to add, with permission of the mover and the seconder, that we do work to have the same position for Black communities as well, as this is something that they have identified to be an issue. And if we're going to say that this is serious, I think words sometimes without actions don't carry a weight. And if we this is something that we support, we have to put our money where our mouth is. I'd like to add a clause to that in there.
I know you've asked for the support of the mover and seconder. If I may, just to, that's noted here and not lost, but I know the Deputy Mayor Helmer wanted to make a comment, and if I might, perhaps I can get some response from him as well, please.
I'm happy to wait until this is sorted out. My comments are on the second thing that's in the package there, the amendment.
All right, thank you very much. Any other comments with respect to the, well, let's go back to the mover with respect to, I'd like to get some specifics around that. I think the clerk would need that. So I wonder, Councillor Kayabага, just some clarity for the benefit of the clerks. But before we do that, just generally, I'd like to get some feedback from the movers. Councillor Salee?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I was going to say Councillor Salee. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Kayabага, for your feedback. So I think if I understand correctly, what she's asking to be amended is to have staff report back on some metrics that can be used to measure our progress in relation to anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and racism related that impacts people of color, as well as she's looking to establish a Black liaison position similar to the Indigenous liaison position we have. I'm just hoping to get that confirmed and to fully understand before I respond.
Councillor Kayabага? We need audio, please.
Thank you. So yes, what Councillor Salee said is what it is what I said.
Councillor Salee?
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't had a chance to obviously consult with my seconder on this motion. I mean, I'm flexible to that, and I know my other colleagues around council haven't had an opportunity to appreciate maybe if the financial our CFO can kind of let us know what that financially might look like for us and where that line item finance would come, if that is the case, or would they be in a better position when they report back on that, if that is something within existing budgets that they can absorb.
Ms. Barbone, are you in any position to comment on this?
Thank you, through the chair. So we would have to go back and take a look at that. Of course, certainly right now we have a significant financial issue, so we'd have to go back and look at our budgets and report back to identify how that could be repurposed.
Councillor Salee?
Yep, that's helpful. So I think I'm fine with that being a report back. I think the only other thing that I would include in that report back specifically with the liaison of the Black liaison position is, if staff are able to do some outreach with the community and kind of get their input and feedback. I recognize Councillor Kayabaga has mentioned that, she did hear from members of the community, but I think it's also important for us to get that in the report back so we can fully appreciate how we would see that as a benefit. I'm not sure if, from my understanding, that's kind of what was going to be done with the Indigenous community, that outreach to kind of have a better appreciation of how they see that role fit, if it's something that, we should head into that direction of doing.
Okay, I think I understood what you said, and without being clever, I think what you're looking to do is this. You had your motion on the floor. Councillor Kayabaga has amended the motion or is suggesting an amendment to the motion that would add a liaison for the Black community liaison, which we've heard from the treasurer that she would report back to us on the implications of that. And in addition to that, that emphasis towards ensuring that we have a diversity and inclusion specialist as soon as we're able, but we've heard also from the city manager that the report back on the Indigenous liaison, while intended for June, is end of year. So I would suspect they're both in that time frame. I wonder where we want to take this, colleagues, because it's an amendment. It comes back to you, Councillor Salee, how you see this shaking out. But it strikes me that I think your motion was clear. Councillor Kayabaga has put a financial component to it specifically, I would say, respectfully, in terms of the addition of a Black community liaison, along with the other two. The other two, I think, have already been considered, but this is new consideration. Does anyone want to add to the dialogue around this?
Mr. Mayor, can I just clarify something?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Councillor Salee.
Just so it's clear, to provide a little clarity for my colleagues. So based on what I heard and what I'm amenable to, and obviously subject to seconder, so it's having staff report back on if that position is something, to get the information related to creating a Black liaison position, and if they can advise the costs associated with that, as well as if they can, do some outreach specifically with the Black community to see how they see that fit and, in relation to that. And then the other part was to report back on the metrics, on how we measure and can we measure our success in relation to anti-Black racism kind of initiatives. And I think that might have been covered in previous ask. I know I've asked that in the past. I don't know the answer to that today, but maybe there's already a short answer that maybe Ms. Livingston already has an answer to. So I think that's that. And I think Ms. Livingston has kind of already answered the other part, which was about the diversity specialist position and the other portion. So I feel as if that's not needed, but unless it is needed, I'm happy to do that. But I think it's just those two pieces, which is the report back on the Black liaison position and the reporting on metrics to measure our success and our progress in relation to anti-Black, in relation to anti-racism.
Councillor Kayabaga, do you think that Councillor Salee has captured your intent of your friendly amendment?
Somewhat, yes. I think getting a report back would be important and a first step into implementing it and seeing it happen. Then
I'm happy to accept that friendly amendment, colleagues. I have a speakers list here. I have Councillor Van Hulst, Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Turner, and Deputy Mayor.
So, I'm pleased with the direction here. We're getting report. It seems that some clarity is needed. Just are moving away from a diversity officer into individual liaisons for communities. How that works out would be nice to see in that report. So thank you to my colleagues for bringing this forward.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't want to make a comment, but now you've given me the floor. I just want, I think clarity needed to be done around the amendment, and very supportive of the having a report back for not only the matrix, but also for the liaison person as well. We need to get that information so we could have that discussion. So happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Turner.
I think it's been addressed. My concerns were just about creating a staff position and just without much notice. So I think if we have information, that will be helpful for us in our decision making.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to introduce the second part of what was circulated early, and I will sort of echo what Councillor Slee said. We're working on the language right up to 3 o'clock, and sorry it arrived relatively soon before the meeting. I do think it's important that Council asks the Police Services Board, which, as you know, I'm a member of, and I'm the budget chair for the Police Services Board, also the health unit and the school boards. Many of these issues, policing, public health, education system, were raised as issues during the Black Lives Matter protest on the weekend, and I think asking these organizations and their boards to respond is an important step that we should also take. So I would introduce that as an amendment, I suppose, and hopefully there's a seconder. I know the mayor said that he would.
Yeah, there may, Deputy Mayor and colleagues, there may be some with a conflict with this particular motion, so that's why maybe separated might be appropriate for this purpose. That might be my only concern about trying to add it as an amendment or an addition or extension of this motion. So, so we know we've got a revised motion on the floor, which has not yet been dealt with. You're looking to put an added, but I wonder if that, if I might suggest that for those who would have a conflict or a potential for conflict, that that be dealt with on as a separate motion.
So
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry,
I'm sorry, who's trying to get, someone is trying to get my attention?
I was just the mover. I was just trying to clarify for, my hope was that we would deal with this first, and then the next motion would be introduced after we voted on this by Councillor Helmer, and then and yourself as a seconder, a completely separate motion to allow that flexibility, and then Councillor Turner can separate the one portion at that time.
So let's hear from Deputy Mayor Helmer again. I think he was finishing his thoughts on that, please.
Either path gets us to the same place, so I'm fine with that.
All right, fine, thank you. So we're now back to the primary motion that has been friendlyized. I don't mean that casually or cutely, but there's been a friendly amendment to it. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say, first of all, this may seem like a small matter, but the word that appears in the motion is systematic, and it should be systemic. And I think we have to get the word right.
So noted. So noted.
I'm just saying, I don't want us to come out of here with the wrong word of something that's very important.
So noted. Yep.
I just want to comment because I've spent the last 10 days listening, and the person I listened to today was Councillor Slee, who was kind enough to call me. My relationship with Councillor Slee is important to me, and I've learned a lot from him. And I appreciated him calling me today to discuss this, and I want to thank him for that. The second part of that is he knows I'm a stickler for things coming late. I assured him this is an emergent motion. This is a motion in reaction to events we've seen recently. There's a lot of whereases in this motion. I think it's important to look at them and look at what they say. It talks about systemic racism existing in London. There's no doubt that there are places in London where racism has been incorporated into systems. I was part of a system, the judicial system, that's changed over the years to deal with that. And I think it's time that every organization in London do that. But I also want to recognize it's all of our jobs, and it's the people in London. It's also their job to address this kind of thing that's so difficult for Londoners. The last thing I would like to say is we've asked that someone report back to us on the next steps that will be taken to end racism in London. I think the first step is all of us looking at ourselves and deciding that's going to happen within ourselves before we look anywhere else. And I feel really very strongly about this. I've listened for the last 10 days, and the voices I've heard have been very important to me. And so I would just want to really acknowledge the work that has gone into this. And a person like me who's 61 years old, I just want to let you know that I hear this, and I acknowledge what's being said, and that's all I had to say.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm going to ask the clerk to just to read the motion as it now is, so that there's clarity. And if we're in a position to vote, then we'll do that after that has been read. Subsequent to that, I know that the Deputy Mayor has a motion that he wants to bring forward. Please go ahead, clerk.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion reads as follows. Whereas the Municipal Council of the Corporation of the City of London acknowledges that systemic anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and people of color racism exists in London. And whereas the Municipal Council unequivocally condemns racism in all of its forms. And whereas the Municipal Council acknowledges that the corporation's workforce is not reflective of the population it services, and that it will continue to work to ensure a reflective workforce. And whereas the Municipal Council affirms the commitment to help eradicate anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and people of color oppression, now therefore it be hereby resolved that the Civic Administration is directed to A, report back to a future meeting of the appropriate standing committee with an update on the implementation of the Community Diversity and Inclusion Strategy, providing specific details with respect to the equity and inclusion lens of the strategy and the steps that will be taken to end racism in London. B, report back to the appropriate standing committee with respect to metrics that may be or are currently implemented to demonstrate progress with respect to hiring to reflect the diversity of the community. And C, report back to the appropriate standing committee with respect to the establishment of a Black liaison officer position at the City of London, similar to the previously approved Indigenous liaison officer position, including input from the community and related financing with respect to this matter.
Any comments or questions about the motion in terms of how it's been read? May we call the question? Oh, sorry, Councillor Morgan. He's so close and so far. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm still working on getting my hand visible in person. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to add some of my comments on this, and I wanted to thank Councillor Sally as well as Councillor Kaibaga, who have acted quick and carried the ball. I will say I myself find it very difficulty to try to do things with when you're not sure about what the right thing is to do or how to do it exactly the way that it's supposed to be done. And we have colleagues who carry the weight when some others are, have the fear of not doing the right thing. So, I think I need to get over myself, and there's a number of other members of the community who needs to get over themselves and step up and not always have specific colleagues have to carry the ball on really important issues. And I want to thank Councillor Sally again. I want to thank Councillor Kaibaga for what you continue to do to forward these issues. And I will certainly, I myself, try to do a better job to try to move these items forward and not just always wait on your actions.
Thanks very much, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'll be really brief. I had an opportunity to have a conversation with Councillor Salih last week. I appreciate his always having an ear to listen and to share his thoughts with me on these things, but I also want to thank Councillor Kaibaga because I think she made the motion that was coming before us stronger today, because it's important, particularly with respect to Part B. It's not just enough to say, well, we're going to do something, but we have to have measurable things to see whether or not we're achieving success. So I just want to thank her for that important addition, I think, to this motion. Measuring whether we're making progress or not really does matter. So thanks for that, and I'll be supporting this one 100%.
Thank you, colleagues. May we call the question? Here we go. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's carried 15-0.
Thank you, councillors. This is an important step. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Sure, so I'll move that motion that I spoke about earlier. I'm not going to repeat myself. I do think this is an important step that we need to take as well.
And I'm honored to second that as we discussed as well. I think that is important. I know that it's been dealt with separately by virtue of potential for conflict. So I'll look for any comments or questions. Councillor Hopkins.
Sorry about that. Yes, I'm supportive of this second part to this motion. I do have a quick question through you, Mr. Chair, to the mover, or maybe you yourself can answer who is going to be responsible for asking for the information to the three boards that are mentioned, is my first question.
Let's give that to Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Usually when these types of motions are passed, the city clerk will send a resolution to the organizations that are named. And so they'll get some communication from the city that way.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, and I assume we will get those resolutions as well, is usually the process. Is there any thought, given that we're going into, we're dealing with COVID and these boards are busy, and then there is the summer months coming forward, and it would be, I don't know how we can get or ask for this information sooner than later. I think it is important following the rally of Black Lives Matter on Saturday. We've all been receiving emails from the community with a number of requests and suggestions. And I'm just hoping that we can have a short time frame for getting this information, given the situation that we're under. I can understand that, but I just want to make that comment. I'd really encourage these boards to give us a response sooner than later. And I just want to make a quick comment about just following up on the comment that was mentioned about doing the right thing. I think we should never be afraid to do the right thing. And this is a really good first step, and I hope we continue along this pathway of inclusionary diversity and looking at how we can do a better job here in our community. And I just want to thank the councillors that have all been involved in this, and your worship as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to be involved in this motion. Since there's multiple boards, maybe we could separate them out so I can support the boards that I'm not on.
So we're talking about the potential of splitting the motion so you can talk or vote to the other issues, Councillor Turner?
If we could just call A, B, and C, or just separate out the health unit as a separate board, that would allow me to show support for the motion for the other boards.
I can't speak for the deputy mayor, but he is wise. So let's, I'm wondering as we turn to him, we're not yet at a point of voting, but in terms of splitting those out, perhaps putting either three separate or two individual units. Deputy Mayor, any comments?
I feel bad for not doing it in the first place. I think it's a good idea. Any member can request it to be divided, and I think we should just pull the health unit out because that's the pecuniary interest. vote on two of them.
All right, so we'll pull out the health unit for voting purposes. Do you have any other comments, Councillor Turner?
Do not, I support the motion of the ones that I can support.
So noted. Thanks very much. I have Councillor Cassidy, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Is it appropriate for me to speak to the health unit one? Though Councillor Turner is recused, it's not going to affect his vote or anything, so I think I'm okay to do that. Yes?
I think you can go ahead on that. I don't think you'll sway Councillor Turner. I think he's pretty stoic in these and solid in these types of things.
Thank you. And I was going to suggest that, so I'm glad Councillor Turner spoke up. Seems pretty easy. So I had the opportunity to speak to Dr. Mackey today about this motion. As the chair of the board, I recognize that it's directed at the board, but I also wanted to run it by him. He's completely supportive of this. The health unit deals with in many of its programs, and the delivery of its programs deals with London's marginalized and vulnerable. When you look at what the social determinants of health are, which means social factors that affect your life that in turn affect the level of your health. And so some of the things that have negative effects on the health of people speak to race, speak to social exclusion, speak to marginalization, and things like that. The health unit a couple of years ago implemented Jordan's principle specific to Indigenous children. So the theory or the motive behind Jordan's principle is that if an Indigenous child presents with an illness or in ill health, there would be no fighting over jurisdictions and who's responsible for this child. That child would be treated and jurisdictional issues would be sorted out after the fact. So I'm just giving this background to see where the health unit has been going over the past many years and what their mandate is in general. So this is something that is extremely, I'm anticipating that will be supported by the board wholeheartedly. It is something that Dr. Mackey supports wholeheartedly. I want to weigh in here on the entire situation that's been going on over the last few weeks. I have spoken to Councillor Kayabaga extensively, almost every day, I think, over the last week. I've been very moved by everything that's going on. I've had the honor to work with Councillor Salih for 6 years now. And I've learned, as other councillors have spoken, a great deal. I've always considered myself an empathetic person. I spoke specifically to Councillor Kayabaga as the mother of a Black son. I've been reading a lot of things lately, and I read something recently about written by a Black mother that said, "When does my little Black boy stop being cute?" And then starts to be perceived as a threat. I'm the mother of a son with mental health issues, and I fear for his life every single day. I can't imagine if my son was Black, because my son has an illness, and that explains the fear that I have of him. If I had to fear every time he left the house that something innocent that he was doing could be perceived as threatening and could cause harm to him, I can put myself in the shoes of a mother who worries. I can't put myself in the shoes of a Black mother, but the closest I can get is just as a mother who worries. So I want to say thank you to Black Lives Matter London, to those young people that organized 10,000 people to march peacefully and effectively in the city of London, trying to maintain a social distance. When you see the aerial view, you see that people are trying to stay spread. So they're trying to be responsible in the midst of a pandemic. But this is an issue that has been affecting our society in a covert way for centuries, for generations. And it's come to the surface because it couldn't stay hidden any longer. And what they did on Saturday, organizing that march, I believe the chief of police said in a note to the board, or to his officers actually, when the board was copied in, it was the largest protest that London's ever seen. And the fact that it was largely peaceful and peaceful by those who were actively involved is a testament to the organizers, their skills, and to the people who participated in that march. So I just want to say thank you to my colleagues for educating me and continuing to educate me. And thank you to the organizers. And thank you to London for showing up and for doing so in such a meaningful way.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I want to thank both Deputy Mayor Helmer and yourself for bringing this motion forward. I think it's really important that the Police Services Board, in particular, although certainly all three of these boards being involved in the response is important. But I can share that I've been on a police ride-along, and I've seen the queues that they're responding to, and I've seen how many of those calls are not really calls that are best served by police officers. And as I've been listening to what folks from Black Lives Matters and others have been saying about, you know, the police can sometimes escalate a situation rather than de-escalate a situation, and the concerns that have been brought forward about the police budget, and looking for action on reallocation for more frontline services in terms of social and mental health services and those kind of supports, which I certainly understand where they're coming from. And I think this council's actually taken some important preliminary steps in the core area action plan and the coordinated and informed response and trying to get some funds flowing that way. But when we talk about the police budget, we in Canada, it's not the same as it is in a place like Minneapolis. And we as a council don't direct the line by line allocations in the police budget. That has to be done through the board. And although we've got three very strong members of this council in Councillor Helmer and Councillor Cassidy and yourself, Mayor Holder, on that board, it still has to come through them. So I think that this is a really timely preliminary step in terms of addressing the fact that there are times when there are situations out there within the response to individuals in the Black community, in the Indigenous community, where not having a police response would be a far better option. And I think that this is an opportunity to open that discussion up with our police services as well. And I know that all three members of this council who are on that board will certainly make sure that that message and that a thorough discussion around that message is had at the police board. So thank you for bringing this to us and giving us a chance to respond in particular to that. But I'm sure that the health unit and the school boards are going to have ideas to share on this as well.
Thank you. Councillor Kayabага.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just also wanted to comment on this motion. I'm in support of this motion. I just want to raise this, however, that we're asking these boards to do what they can to respond to what the Black Lives Matter London has submitted to us as the leaders and politicians of this city, as the people who make the decisions on the way that we distribute the budget in our city. Like Councillor Lewis, I myself went on 2 police ride-alongs to learn and to get an idea of what they do. And I found that a lot of the calls that I responded in one night, I think it was 70% of the calls we went to were mental health related. And on the second night, 90% of the calls that were responded to were mental health related up until 4 a.m. From when I left them and went home. We were still responding to mental health calls. And I just want to raise that there's a young man who just recently passed away, was having a mental crisis, Caleb Joko. And the police responded to a mental health crisis, and it didn't go well, as the young man had already had dealings with the police, and it was traumatic for him, and he chose to end his life in that moment.
I think that as we hear back what the boards are going to bring forward, whether it be the school boards or the public health or the police board, it's also important that we keep in mind that we are the ones who make these decisions on where we allocate the money. And as today, I read an article where the London Police chair of the London Police Board and the London Police Association president both spoke on the fact that they are not trained and they were never meant to be doing these services. And this is money that could be reallocated back into the community. For so long in Canada, not just in London, but in Canada, we have seen a defund in public health, in mental health services, and more funding in other things. So let's keep that in mind as we support this motion to go forward, that we are actually willing to take action, and it's not just a burden from them. Yeah, I want to hear what they have to say, and I also want to put it out there that, you know, for the school boards, we really need to reconsider the officers that are in the schools. As again, many people have sent us email. We have heard from many people on the trauma that it causes on the children of marginalized community, Black and Indigenous children in our community, how they're traumatized, and how this has been going on for a long time. It didn't just start yesterday. Many people are waking up to it now, but this has been ongoing for a long time. And I think that as we expect to hear from them, we should also start thinking about what it is that we as politicians of this city, as leaders of this city, are willing to do to make sure that it's not just, we're not just saying this, that it's important, and we do not continue to see a loss of many lives.
Thank you, Councillor Kayabaga. We've got 2 votes. The first does not include the health unit, and the second will. So what I would like to do, with your support, is to go ahead and call the vote on the first, which does not include the health unit board. When the clerk is ready. Shall we? Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman. Councillor Lehman, audio, please.
Sorry, yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yeah.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed, 15-0.
Colleagues, the second motion is specifically with respect to the Middlesex London Health Unit. So when the clerk is ready, we will call the question.
I just have my hand up, Mayor, if maybe wanted to speak.
On this motion,
Yes, correct. I just, because I wanted to talk about the.
okay, it's been duly moved and seconded. Councillor Salee.
I'm sorry about the interruption, Mr. Mayor. And I did want to just speak on this briefly. And, you know, I know I had a chance to speak with you earlier and as well with Councillor Helmer as we were working collaboratively on this, on all these issues to make sure that we were able to move forward our city and have something meaningful. From my perspective, I think racism really is a public health emergency, and I'm no medical official and I'm no medical expert. And I know someone earlier, Councillor Cassidy, mentioned the turnout. And again, I'm no historian, but I would definitely agree that this was the most historic turnout ever to be seen in London, where people coming out and expressing their views and their need. I'm glad that Black Lives Matter London made it very clear and painted the picture for us of what exactly needs to be done. But I would just want to remind folks that what has been asked isn't anything new, and some of the perspectives shared are anything really necessarily radical. But the fact that it's things that, you know, have been said from time and time again, but now that those conversations are moving to the mainstream, and I'm glad we're here in this place. But I also do want to reflect on the fact that this council, you know, should recognize that we have done some work on this and have made attempts in the past. I won't talk about the last council's attempts, but specifically, I know Councillor or Deputy Mayor Helmer, you know, was able to find a significant savings in this budget in relation to the police budget, so that we would have, as a council, opportunity
as a council to move and invest in other areas, which we have done in housing and many other areas in homelessness that are very much needed. So we have been proactive and we've been having these conversations. And I remember when Helmer first advised me of kind of what he was thinking about in relation to the police budget, way before this was front and center conversation. And even if I go back 4 or 5 years ago with Councillor Morgan, when we talked about trying to find those resources and putting the money in, and we try to do some work. I won't talk too much about the past, as we had a kind of a different road and outcome at the end of that. But nonetheless, we have been having these conversations. And as a former chair of the police board, working with Councillor Helmer and working with the mayor, we've raised it time and time again about the fact that mental health calls and who's responding to those are just completely not the role of the police. And that something needs to be done. And that London actually has been leading in that front and speaking very loudly. And whether that's with my direct conversations with the ministers in the past, with the ministry, and with our board sending communication, the police board at the time and time again, having those conversations. So I think we all are speaking on the same page. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that, even with the association or the police service itself, that this is something that they find that they shouldn't be doing this kind of work because it requires a different level of expertise. And we don't need an armed response at times for a lot of the responses that are happening in our community. And I think, unfortunately, there is a significant gap in our health, in the health sector. And we need to address that gap to really move the needle forward and to really move London forward. And I'm hopeful that the police service board, the school board, and the health unit will be able to take the steps that they need to do to come out strongly and to respond to the city and to respond to Londoners, because I don't think this is going away and people want to see results. And I am confident, knowing the people who are serving on the boards, that they will come out with something strong and that they'll be able to send a strong message to Londoners that they hear them loud and clearly. So again, thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Salee. Colleagues, we have this motion on the floor that is specifically focused to the Middlesex London Health Unit Board. So with that, and with your permission, we will call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes. And Councillor Turner.
I abstain.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0 with 1 recuse.
Thank you, colleagues. I would ask if there's any additional business. Seeing none before, excuse me, Councillor Turner, please.
Sorry, Your Worship, but just with respect to the provincial announcement yesterday of the Stage 2 reopenings, I wonder if I just might be able to make an inquiry, recognizing that our council meeting cycle for any approvals it might not be well in line with that. So I think the city manager's office made an announcement today of some measures that the city would be taking to help facilitate businesses that are permitted to reopen. My question is if there's any steps that council might need to take in order to help hasten that, and if so, if those might be available for us. I recognize it was stated on, I believe, the meeting for the 23rd, but if there might be an opportunity to do some of that work at the upcoming council meeting next week.
Perhaps I could ask Ms. Livingston to comment.
Your Worship, we're reviewing right now what additional flexibility we need to have in place. So we were intending on including the fee relief in that report because your report deals with the broader financial picture. But the regulatory, any kind of relaxation, we're just looking to see what we can do within our own delegated authorities without having to take additional steps. So I'll have a better answer for you as we work through that over the next day or so.
Councillor Turner?
For Your Worship. I appreciate that. I think if there is some stuff that we can help to ratify perhaps next week, then and if that needs to be brought up as an emergent motion, then I think it would be reasonable for us to consider those steps. If there's other things that might take a little bit longer, I can understand that as well, recognizing that I think there wasn't a lot of notice to municipalities in this phase in order to get our ducks in a row. So thank you. I appreciate the work you're doing on that.
Thank you. I would agree. Not a lot of notice, but some potential excitement as some of the business community looks to move forward. And but there are some questions, and I'm sure the city manager, as opportunities come up for us to be looking at this for our next council meeting, if appropriate, then those will come forward. Colleagues, before we adjourn, I want to say thank you to staff. I want to say thank you to all of you. This was an extended meeting, but we had some issues to deal with, and I thank you for all the way that you've dealt with these very critical and serious, important issues to London. This matters, and so thank you for that. With that, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll do a hand vote on this. All those in favor? I don't see one person opposed, Clerk. What can you say about that? Good. You got to announce it. Just say motion. It's passed. Thanks very much, colleagues. Meeting adjourned.